But I see people that, man, I'm building a monster, I'm building a lot of drive, and that dog is always hurt. And so that dog never actually has the career in the sport that you wanted because you never taught them any sort of idea of self-preservation. And at a certain point, to me, that's the trainer's fault. You created this situation where your dog is basically useless for your intended purpose because you prioritize drive to the point where you're like, man, my dog retrieved the metal pipe so hard they broke all their teeth. Man, my dog jumps over this palisade and they tore every ligament in all four legs. Like, you see that kind of stuff happen sometimes, and it just irks the shit out of me.
What a monster,
in defense of that, and I will say this,
there you go,
because
Nick.
I have
love it here, all right?
because I'm still into building
I
monsters.
knew I'd chap these guys' ass over that.
I'm still into building monsters. Number one.
Yeah.
I've changed a little bit though.
Have you
right?
seen
So
that puppy right now?
if I take,
I haven't met him yet. You keep telling me he's going to bite me.
He will.
What's the proverbial saying? You can't get two dog trainers to agree on anything besides the third one not knowing anything. That's what this episode's about. We're going to do another iteration of the trainer fight. It is something that we've done in the past a couple times. One kind of turned into a smooch fest, a love fest, but then the last one between Jeremy Moore and Bob Owens seemed to ruffle some feathers in a lot of good ways, a lot of constructive conversations through a lot of parties. And since that episode, I've really just been asked a whole lot of times when I was going to do another trainer fight. So when I knew that we were going to get together, I thought it'd be something fun, something different to do. So myself and a buddy or two kind of compiled a random hodgepodge list of topics and questions. They're in no particular order, and I'm going to throw it out there, and then we're just going to kind of discuss it. I don't want to spend 20-something odd minutes on every single question. So, if y'all have an opinion, state it. This is not supposed to be a love fest, so by all means, have fun with it. But any questions? Really, the only rule is there are no rules.
there is no trainer fight club.
No trainer. All right. So I don't think that you can have really kind of any debate in the dog world without just starting off with the softball, the easy one, just kind of grease the wheels. You can only pick one pointing breed for the rest of your life. What is it and why? Randall, start with you.
Oh man. If I could only pick one for the rest of my life, what am I do? Am I like doing versatile dog stuff or just hunting upland game?
You can have a pointing dog, and then you can do whatever you can with that.
Ooh. Man, I'm partial to my poodle pointers right now, only because I value the retrieve so much, and I think that they're pretty naturally good at that. So that opens up some doors without having to do a whole bunch of other stuff. But if I was gonna go like just straight upland life, like probably just go get a setter. They're dope. I got nothing against them.
Grayson,
Pointer.
that's just it.
Yeah. It's like I can only have one pointing dog for the rest of my life.
The
and
pointer.
I want it to point birds. Like I can get companionship from other dogs. I love tinkering with my EBs. They're fun. They're my hobby. But yeah, I mean, if you want a pointing dog, there's one out there that can do it really well, and there's a couple of breeds out there that do it really well. But yeah.
Any issues against the poodle pointer?
I mean, here we go. No, I would say I didn't used to. I used to brag that like every poodle pointer I had come through my kennel was like there were no duds. And then I would say in the last 2 or 3 years, I'm seeing some stuff I don't like, mostly temperament-related issues, but some nerviness. But I mean, that's not to paint with a broad brush. I don't do that a lot. But for all you poodle pointer enthusiasts out there, pay attention. Your breed's getting popular, and that comes with some downsides.
Well, I don't disagree with you there at all. Like as much as I love the breed, I don't disagree with you there. Like coats are becoming an issue, bites are becoming an issue, temperament, like you said. Like I agree with you.
Did you ever think you'd hear Randall Lycan say bites are becoming an issue?
No, not that. No, the confirmation of the bite, not actually biting things.
Nate, thoughts?
If it was just a straight up pointing dog, I would say a setter. If I had to pick one hunting dog to have for the rest of my life, it'd be a Draughtar. But I really do like our Munsterlanders a lot. I think they're good at all the things, the companionship piece, and I like the way that they hunt, and they're just nice dogs.
Why is Grayson wrong for picking the pointer?
I just don't like the way they look, honestly. Like if I had to pick between an English pointer and an English setter, what I want to see like standing on point on the top of a hill, I'd just like a setter better, I think.
That's fair. I mean, it says that you probably don't have cockleburs where you come from.
He's
Yeah.
used to him. He's got
Yeah.
the Muncie, right?
Yeah,
He's got a comb.
all I see is a bunch of mats hanging off a dog on the top of a hill.
Yeah. All right. Any last thoughts or disagreements on the breed?
Nobody mentioned a Griff. I'm just joking. I'm just joking.
All right. You can only train one obedience command on all your dogs remaining, with the exception of recall, assuming that would be any of y'all's command. What is it and why? Nate, start with you on this one.
Whoa.
Whoa. All right. Any reason why, or we just want to jump around, then we can defend it?
Well, for our dogs and what we do, if you have a recall, then you get them back, and the other thing you mainly need them to be able to do is stop when you tell them to. If I had a third, and this comes from Dobbs, he calls it the 3-action introduction, would be a send away. I mean, I really think any dog, regardless of what you're doing, those are really the 3 basic ones that you need, and probably in that order.
Come, stop, go. That's pretty much what everybody says.
I would put go before stop. I mean,
So you're doing the send off before?
Mm-hmm. I think, yeah, push pull is like, for me, it's first 2 things I introduce. I don't teach duration before action stuff. I mean, considering we're talking compulsively, I think, once you enter any world of reward based stuff, then you're like, the options are so limitless. You're transitioning between behaviors so quickly that it'd be hard to just train one behavior with that and not mess with others.
But if that was if you could only pick one obedience command, like I see with your labs, it would be if you had a recall, then go would be the next one. But what about with with an EB or with a pointing dog? It would still
It's
be
tough, yeah. Like
go?
I don't really, I teach them to stop and stand, but it's always contextual. Like I don't really. I use the word "whoa." I train with "whoa," but, I think if I, it's tough. We talk commands, like, what do we? I think we have to define command. Is it a word I give a dog, and then the dog performs an action?
Yeah. So you're going to cue and expect an action based on
Yeah,
that
but I
cue.
mean, because I'll do a lot of things on a check cord. We kind of brushed on last night that I may never revisit once the dog's done conceptualizing what it needs, but and I won't have the ability to necessarily cue the dog into that. But I feel like, once they've got the concept, then I've moved on. So I think if they point, which they should, then and I've got a recall, that I could probably elicit duration and stand without ever cueing it.
That's good. I like that.
Randall?
Initially, I was with Nate on whoa because I could just thinking pragmatically, like I could use that to chain into other things, right? Like I can use that. But the more I kind of got thinking about it, we can just use birds, teach a dog to stop. I don't need whoa necessarily, all right? I can just condition, good fun runs and get a dog expanding without me having to put any pressure to it or really make them go anywhere. Like I can do all those things, and then I already have a recall. If I know I can do those things, heel might be it for me.
Heel.
And the only reason why is like safety factors. Like if all I can do is recall my dog and now I got to collar him the whole way to the truck while he kangaroo hops there, like that'd be a giant pain in my butt, right? So I don't know. I mean, I see the value of whoa big time using that to pair, but I can do that with birds. So.
It's gonna be a terrible trainer fight, bro.
Yeah, I like Grayson's answer. He talked me out of mine. I want to take his answer. This is a really good fight.
So I assumed, Randall, that you were going to say your downstay as just how how you look at downstay and you're constantly, talking about the pros to it.
I thought it
figured
was
that
going to be Stellan.
Stellan, the pocket. Yeah, if we could give a bite command, I think that's more of a go thing. But, no, I mean downstays are super important, right? Like there's a ton of impulse control in there where a dog's got to settle and change drives and sit there, right? And there's all kinds of things that we can do after that. I know you've talked a little bit about it, about rewarding dogs in that state and then putting them into a different drive and why you can or should or shouldn't do that depending on the dog. But I think downstays are ultra important. And the only reason I say that from experience is dealing with some spicy dogs. And I'll tell you, it helps. It helps a lot. With those nervy, just kind of got the crazies all the time, it helps a ton. So.
I just find it interesting. Your initial response was "whoa," so stay. Yours was "go away," and yours was essentially "come here and stay with me" on the heel, and then the downstay. So we kind of covered all three bases that we just talked about. Anybody besides
Well,
you?
the what Grayson said is a good point, right? Like your point should be elicited, and if my dog will hold a bird so I can get there, I really don't need any of the rest of it that I would be stopping the dog for to hunt with the dog. And if I want to manage chase or take away chase, I can use recall to do that. So I like his answer. I
And
think
I think, and I
it's
think
right.
personally, like if you feather it right, like I think without whoa, you can put a dog in a place of stasis. If you've got push and pull, then I can make the dog not anticipate push and not anticipate pull and and stay in a position.
I agree with you, man. Like you don't need whoa. You don't. 100% you don't. Like I'll use it a lot to pair a behavior, right? Just classical conditioning into it, but um that's only for certain dogs. Like
It's valuable. Like I said, I use it, and like I don't have a problem with people using whoa. Always I do you know I don't know the right way to say it. I'm not irritated by it, and I'm not aggravated by it, but there are a lot of people
That
that
misuse it
well,
or overuse
not
it.
just misuse it, but the thing is like it's the most important thing. It's the foundation. If you don't have woe, you have nothing. And I just don't agree with that.
I don't agree with that either.
The woe series I did, you did the episode on no woe, talking about how you essentially use recall and the anticipation of recall on the chase to bring the dog in to where you weren't using woe. So it's not surprising that's consistent. And then, Randall, I knew that you were coming with your downstay. The heel surprises me.
You got me thinking about it. And the word I do use the most is off. I put my dogs in down more than I do anything.
I
If
like
you watch
it
me
because,
handle my dogs, I'm saying off all the time.
and I think if you have dogs that are like really um, easily brought into a place of high arousal, then I think that downstay is like the perfect way to get like here's some suppression, enjoy that while I don't deal with you for a while and allow you to come off your
High.
super high. Yeah. So it's
Big fan.
practical.
I know you got that from my Instagram page, but I posted about that a couple times.
A few times.
Yeah. Mostly for pets, man. That's a different ball game. Bird dogs and pets aren't quite the same. And I say that because when I get bird dogs, even if the owners aren't doing the right things, they're doing something with their dog. There's some sort of relationship, there's some sort of working relationship. They're trying. I get a lot of pets that have just been given everything. They're as spoiled and entitled as you could think. And that leads to some issues. And I think the downstays really help them a lot.
I'd say I probably use a place board in a way that's very similar to that, where it's like just hey bro, I put you there and you have the option to get off, but there's a consequence for that, and so you have to make the decision to stay in that position. And by in so doing, um, you're ceding your will to me, and you are going to achieve a state of chill, or you're just going to be there forever. And either way, it's fine with me. And I think that's really valuable to have that. And a lot of modern pet people might disagree with that vehemently. They don't like the thought of suppressing dogs or suppressing emotional states, and I think that's extremely valuable, and I think it's really good for the dog
I guess
emotionally.
my question for you is like when you're starting that, are you starting in a reward based system or are you compulsion based in the start of that?
I do it both ways.
Yeah.
Like I don't this is an open thing for me. Is like rarely do I use reward based system with client dogs. It's just it's very
Time.
it's well I mean because once you've established it, it's super efficient and it's a cheat code for moving forward. Um, but if people are expecting results in a certain amount of time from me, and I have not just obedience to get through, but I have a lot of things to work on you with. Plus, in dealing with bird dogs, I get the added benefit that I'm already working in positive reinforcement a lot simply by doing their work and pre-macking my way through things. And so I tend to be kind of pure compulsion with those dogs in those scenarios early, but I have a you know, I my own personal dogs are going to get a lot of reward based stuff and they're going to get to the place board in a reward based fashion first. But that said, pretty quickly I'm moving to stepping off has a consequence.
Do you see the side effects of the
That's exactly what I was about to ask.
suppression
You
from doing
can,
compulsion based without the reward first?
you absolutely can, and this kind of gets to some things we talked about in the last day or two about, um, you know, intuition and experience kind of guiding you through recognizing that and either getting ahead of it or being able to dig yourself out of that hole if you've over suppressed a dog.
Because that's what I noticed with reward based. Because I'm a reward based
Hmm.
balance trainer, right?
Of
So like
course.
I'm going to shape all my stuff generally
Hmm.
reward based. We can do some negative reinforcement shaping, but you got to be careful there. I don't notice the suppression in dogs that I'm starting in a reward based system and then asking them to lay there and calm down, right? Like I don't see the fallout from it.
Yeah.
Where if I go compulsion in the beginning, you can get a lot of boo boo lips real quick.
Yeah, and I don't mind boo boo lips sometimes. Like I think suppression is a word that gets a bad rap.
Yeah.
Like I think it's become kind of a bad word. Like I think there's a ton of value in taking a dog that's highly aroused and taking them past the baseline in the opposite direction. Like and then achieving stasis, like long
For a
term.
period of time.
Yeah, but what I
Yeah.
want is when I tell you to go to a place board, like I want you to go to that place board and I want you to lay down and go to sleep. Like I want that to be the state you just automatically assume you're going to because you're not getting off of that thing. But I also want the moment I go over there and go and touch your ear, you like bolt off and you're like, I'm excited to be off the board and I'm happy. But when I'm there, I'm not only controlling your physical being in space and time, I'm taking you out of your state of arousal. And that to me is important. And I like that. And maybe it's not for everybody, but it's for me.
Mm-hmm.
I agree that there's a lot of value in using suppression strategically at certain times. I think what we call something I like to pay attention to, we call it training for behavior and affect, right? Is like what the dog is doing and how they also feel while they do it. And so there's certain things like, especially with pet dogs or with a companion gun dog that's going to do pet stuff too, the idea of sending them somewhere, and I don't want you to be waiting for the
Yes.
reward that's coming. I don't want you to be anticipating even just the reward of liberty really at the end. Like they're if that's what they get every time and like there's not some long duration there, then I think what happens is you're always having an anticipatory effect there, and then that impacts the way that that dog is feeling when they're engaging in that behavior. The other thing too for me having Keeler in my background is when people talk about escape avoidance training, the piece that they miss, and this is in the Tortora book, if people don't have the book by Daniel Tortora on training with e-collars, that's the best e-collar book ever written ever. And so when he talks about escape avoidance training, the third phase of that is relaxation, right? You do see an anxiety response or a pouty response in a dog when you apply negative, like when you're training with negative reinforcement, you're using a lot of compulsion, right? But
Was
at a
that?
certain,
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry to interrupt. Was
it's
that
all good.
written for Tritronics?
Yes,
I have read like a long time ago. I need to revisit
I
that
got
book.
2
Sorry.
copies if you want one.
Gotcha.
So that last phase relaxation comes when the dog believes they are avoiding feeling the compulsion, right? Because they responded promptly enough and correctly. And then over time, you see that anxiety or those negative emotions kind of bleed off. They go away, and all you're left with is flat behavior, but not anything that really has a negative association with it. In my experience, right? If you do it correctly. Now,
I would. To me, that's what I think, and I do that. That is a normal part of every dog that comes through my companion gun
yeah.
dog program. You know.
And a lot of what I'm trying to do now, especially when I'm talking about the particular types of reinforcers I'm going to use, whether they're negative or positive, and even having kind of like options within each of those categories, is I'm thinking about my use cases. And sometimes it's not even about the behavior they're doing, but it's that behavior in a specific context. So I tell people, for me, like, I don't really reward my dogs for anything in the house, because in the house is turn off. I'm watching TV. You go hang out here. There's no WrestleMania in my living room, right? None of that. You can go play grab ass outside. We train in certain environments, right? And so I want my dog to kind of have situational sort of context clues on how to behave. And where that really comes from is how I am reinforcing those behaviors in those environments. And then you get very different responses from the dog, even within the same behavior. I'm talking about like emotionally. And so
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of value in that. And so those are the conversations that I have with my clients, is like, well, when you're working on a downstay, you don't want the dog, for most of my clients, you don't want the dog vibrating in that downstay, like expecting to receive something afterwards. Uh, and then for my recalls, though, I do want those to be very highly motivated. I want the dog hauling ass. I want them expecting something good is going to happen, right? And so we reinforce each of those very differently.
So when you have a dog in say a relaxed state in a downstay, do you give a preparatory cue for a recall if you want? You know what I'm saying? Like, so do you bring the dog into a capped state prior to releasing from position so that you get the speed and intensity you want in your
For
recall?
most of my clients,
Yes,
if your dog is put in a stationary behavior for duration, there is no remote release from that behavior.
that's
You go
fair.
get the
That's
dog.
fair. I mean, it's a smart. Yeah, it's obviously. I think when you're especially dealing with clients, um, it's always safe for no remote releases because we're always going to get anticipation.
You get to have a lot less conversations about how to handle that. If it's just like, if you're in the field, you're going to go and tap your dog on the head to release them for a retrieve. Even if you got to walk 50 yards to go do that, then that's what you're going to do. And then in the house, if I put you on place or in a downstay because I'm going to leave the front door open to get multiple trips of bringing groceries in or something, then I'll go to that dog and release them afterwards. That way, there's absolute clarity there about when the dog's allowed to stop doing that behavior.
That's the most fun game I see my pet dog clients end up having is down here, down
Yeah.
here,
Yeah.
down here. I'm like, yeah, like you, hey, down. We're gonna go get the dog
Because
ourselves.
what that inevitably turns into in the field
Yep.
or in the house is that person gets 4-ish feet away or something, and then that's good enough, right? And then the dog breaks.
Yep.
Or it
I
just
go with
doesn't.
you.
Or just yeah.
Hopefully, we're not there. Yeah.
All right. So Grayson, I think you win that one. Nate, you changed his mind, and then you even had Randall rethinking his decision. So I think you get a point on that round.
I don't even remember what the initial question was.
I don't either.
You're one.
we started talking about like
But I won.
cool stuff.
Exactly. That's the whole purpose
This is
of
the
this.
most arbitrary win I've ever had.
Congratulations.
This is the most meaningful thing that you've ever done in your life.
The next one, we kind of talked about this last night and probably a few times other than that, but let's just reiterate on this one and cover it. The value of reward in place, a.k.a. room service for pointing dogs versus reward away from place. So, Grayson, let's start with you on that one.
Yeah, I used to be a firm believer that it was worthless until I heard Nate describe stability.
So Nate won the fight on this one already.
So like now I see like a lot more value in it. No, I think I do think it's like contextually dependent, like everything. I think I think personally in my training, I could be persuaded otherwise. But I need to go train with Nate to like see where my value would come from it. But I believe it could be there.
So clarify your position for those listening,
Well,
because
I think when we're dealing with bird dogs specifically, I spend a lot more time, and this gets to kind of what we touched on with Woe earlier. Is I spend a lot of time, and I had a mentor that always described the field as always either being tilted uphill or downhill or neutral. And I like to think about that. So if I can achieve neutrality, and I'm thinking in terms of anticipatory uh, uh, or anticipation of the dog, whether he's going to be released forward or whether he's going to be recalled or whether I'm going to go tap him forward or whether I'm going to go drag him away. What I always want from my dog is to anticipate the fact that anything is possible and therefore remain intense, but be stable. But I've never used room service as a way to achieve that stability. My stability always comes through there's multiple possibilities that in this sequence, and if you anticipate any one of them, it's a guarantee that that will be the wrong one. And so wait and be happy in stasis. But I've never used room service as a piece of that, but I could see it being a valuable piece. So right now I'm not currently using it. I've never used it before, and I never considered it adding value to stability until I heard Nate describe that, and then I can see that. But for me, it's always, my thought around I have a dog in a steadiness sequence, usually well beyond the flush. One thing I don't want you to do is even anticipate that the sequence is over. So the moment you begin to let down, I may shoot a gun, I may crack a whip, I may flush a bird, I may do something, I may walk back in front of you as if you can anticipate a bird flying. If you're too forward, I may recall you under pressure. Um, if you're even if you haven't broken, if I can see in your brain, like when I look at you, that you're anticipating breaking forward, then I may recall you away to me. And so if I can get a dog to just go, okay, I don't know what's coming, so I might as well stay in place, but don't don't let down, because if I let down, the sequence is probably not going to end, and remain as intensely static as possible for as long a duration as possible. And that's what I want to see in that specific situation. And so that's, and I think I've done a pretty good job of getting there with some dogs without room service, but I could see other dogs where it might be valuable, especially dogs that are falling apart because of intensity, sometimes maybe, or,
That honestly, to me, is the best use case for it. Is you have these dogs that, when the way you'd hear a lot of people say it is they have so much drive, right? That, and what I really kind of interpret that as is they really want that reward really bad, and so then instead of, and these are the dogs that, like, you try to stop them with a collar and they just run through it, right? That kind of stuff. And so instead, if I can teach them that they're going to get exactly what they want and they can put forth way less effort to have it happen, that's been the easiest way to rectify a lot of problems with those really, really motivated dogs where their intensity gets the best of them. But it does have like everything has a cost, right? And so we talk about delivering rewards to the dog add stability at the cost of intensity. And so all the things that you're saying about basically having anything could happen there, right? That's when we get into like a variable reinforcement schedule, and that's really important for that. I think the thing that's missing in what we're talking about right now is and I think the conversation we were having last night, I had a little bit of trouble there too, is knowing what the answer you're giving, what phase in your training process are you when you're saying, like, when you're doing that thing you're doing, and maybe the way that you train, like, you keep that variation there kind of from the beginning. For me, just the way that I've been doing this stuff is, at least with the obedience work, and I consider everything using like the NAVDA definition, right? For pointing, like everything, once I'm in the picture, the handler's in the picture, then we're kind of talking obedience then. And so when I'm talking about obedience and I'm teaching those skills in my acquisition phase, or my what I would call my continuous reinforcement phase, the dog will do it right every time because I'm going to make them using pressure, and they will be paid every time, so that there's no confusion about what you're supposed to do and that there's value in it for you. And then when I see that they do anticipate, that's when we start varying. So that's when I would move to what you're talking about, where sometimes you get paid, sometimes you don't, sometimes you get released to your reward, sometimes it gets brought to you, sometimes I ask for secondary obedience before I send you for a retrieve, right? So you're talking about like recalling back to heel. That's when I would start using all of that stuff. But for me, that initial anticipation is what lets me know the dog understood the lesson.
No, let me ask you this: like, do you think, and this is in your average dog,
Mhm.
do you think that there is more value in delivering a room service bird to that dog, or releasing that dog
It's way less value when
into
you bring it
hold
to
on,
them.
into a chase with no retrieve?
It depends on the dog.
Yeah.
So, like, I know some dogs that the chase is a really big reward for them. I think there's other dogs that if they don't actually get to possess the bird, then I don't feel like they feel as though they were rewarded. And then there's some dogs that they take either one. They're happy to chasing is cool. If I catch it, that's cool. I
Could
think
you? Could you? I mean, it is. I don't know. I think I work from a place where I'm working. I think in the same way that potentially, and this is, I'm going to go out on a limb because this could be completely wrong. I don't think it is. But like how we add the value of ignition to pressure, or how you add in those that practice NAPOPO. Um, I think it's very important for a trainer, especially in somebody training bird dogs through a sequence, a steadiness sequence, uh, to define value to the dog, and what you and how is the dog perceiving chase, and if they're not perceiving it with enough value, then one thing I see early on is it's my job to add value to chase. And so for like Pete at this point in his life, like, we can have a bird flush. He stays through a sequence. 15 seconds later, I come into the situation. I may do anything. I may not involve myself at all. And then I release him, and that bird's long gone. He may run off in a separate direction. And I think I played a role in making that more valuable to that specific dog than to me walking back to him, even with a crippled bird at that point in time, and delivering it to him.
why do you think it's more?
I think in the same way that, like, if and I always like to think of Premac in regards to this, but like the same way that behaviors become reinforcing, like if I'm doing an obedience routine, then there can be a ton of value um in recalling a dog to heel from a specific scenario. Like it that that can have power of reinforcing the last thing you did. If it's does that make sense to you? Or is it,
So like the dog did something and then you call them to heel position, and you're saying that action of coming to heel is reinforcing of the behavior that happened beforehand?
potentially, if coming to heel predicts a reinforcer, I think a lot of times of like releasing a dog into a car or out of a car or something like that, and I put you on a place board, And it's like there's a release and a relief in the opportunity to just perform that specific behavior.
Yeah.
And I think that over time I get that same effect in the release from a steadiness sequence. It doesn't have to be into chase.
Okay.
I mean, it wouldn't in a to me. I would consider it chase, like a way delayed chase from static. But I think in the way I train, that's very important to me.
I guess why is the dog motivated to chase a bird?
That's a great question because I know where you're heading with that, but I don't think it's just in predatory satiation in terms of continuing the chase, capture, kill, possess
Yeah.
sequence, right? Like I think each one of those have intrinsic value on their own, independent of the complete context.
But that's dependent on the dogs, right? Because a lot of selective breeding, what we were doing was, I think, augmenting, like we're changing that prey sequence for that dog. Like I would say, like a retriever has a lot more of the chase and capture.
Yes.
Right. I would say the terriers have a lot of kill.
Yeah.
I would say that the pointers we've changed the sort of I guess the seeking behavior that I would say actually happens before
Hunting.
the chase does, right?
Drive, yeah.
And then the stalking, we've really kind of changed that for them to some degree, right? Especially when you look at the ones that kind of just do it out of the box, right?
Mhm.
Like when you see these little puppies, like some of the pointers and setters that, I mean, they're basically staunch the first time they see a bird, right? And so I think the reason why I'm saying that is because I think the value of those things is different for different dogs. I think it's why I like the dogs that I have is because they have kind of pronounced all of it.
Sure.
Like they have, I think like a lot of the continental versatile breeds have the most unaltered, maybe kind of most natural overall prey sequence in the sense that they hunt.
And they don't have a ton of point.
Right. But
Yeah.
they hunt, they chase, they want to possess the bird. It's not like they run to it and then just stand there, right? So
And like so right, like, and this is, and I agree. I don't. So one point I just want to make while we're talking on that, because I think getting into point, it's really important to consider, like, when we talk about reinforcers and when we talk about um, dopamine, and you will be from a place of knowledge and learning, you'll have a better grounding in this than I do. But it's the anticipation of.
I hope one day I live up to how nice you are and the things you
I
say
mean, I
about
really,
me.
I really enjoy it, but because you articulate things in Nipopo that actually make me want to participate. Like, you know what I mean? And, no, but I'm big into that. Like Sapolsky esque. The anticipation of the reinforcer from a chemical, place of chemistry is more valuable than the actual satiation.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I think when we're dealing in pointing dogs, that is extremely pronounced.
But that only works if they really believe that they have a chance to get it.
Absolutely. So if we put that on a variable reinforcement schedule to the point of, like, what is jackpot theory, right? Like, so if I put a nickel into a slot machine and every time I pull the lever it gives me 6 cents, it's garbage. But I will feed that thing $5,000 and win 300 and be elated.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so that is what I'm trying to achieve. And I think that we as trainers have the power to create the value where we want it to be. And I think you do that with room service. And it's something I haven't done, but now I'm seeing that I could. And
I think what we're missing is that with the room service, and correct me if I'm wrong, right? Because I use it too, is to build stability in the initial behavior before we can get to the variable rate of
Yeah, like honestly,
room service or retrieve and get our intensity up while maintaining our stability.
when I'm doing a lot of that initial steadiness work, I'm kind of trying to have the dog not in drive. And so I think you are doing a lot of your training in drive. And so when I'm starting when I'm starting that work, I kind of want to pull the dog out of drive because I think that, and there's a lot of discussion about this, like there's studies that say that when you're in a higher state of arousal you learn better and faster, and I think that that's true when you're working on things that don't require a certain amount of concentration maybe. And so I think that there's times when I want the dog to be really thoughtful about what they're doing, and so I do kind of try to intentionally pull them out of drive. I think the other thing too is a lot of the way that I train is not necessarily because I think it's the best way to do it. It's because I think it's the safest way for somebody who doesn't do this
Yeah, that's fair.
for a
That's fair.
living. And
Yeah.
so when I teach this stuff, part of the reason why we teach like pressure is a predictor of reward is so that when you accidentally overpressure the dog, you have a way out and you don't ruin the dog. So like kind of desensitizing the dog to pressure a little bit and classically conditioning it to predict reward is a safeguard against somebody doing something that they shouldn't have, which is almost always going to happen with like just a dog owner, right? That's trying to do this training themselves. It's also the reason why we do all the reward based stuff. Like, a lot of people are really receptive to that, but some people, I'm not doing a good job of getting them to see value in it. But honestly, the value for me is if I condition an involuntary physical and emotional response to a marker where the dog goes, I'm really happy and excited right now. Then when I overpressure them, I hit them on too high a level on the e-collar and I see them attitude goes in the shitter. And then I go, oh, I just messed that up. Then I click and then they go, oh no, I'm good again. Right. And that's the point of having that, is so I have a way to be able to make mistakes and not have them have such a detrimental impact to the dog. Now, if you keep making the same mistake over and over, then it's still going to be a problem for you. But it lets me always push in training a little bit. And when it was a little bit too much, I have a way to recover the dog very easily. And then I might put him up and come back. And then I'll know that was a half step too much, right?
Yeah. I think, I mean, and I mean, just to bring it, no, because I do agree. I mean, I think there's a ton of value in your early reward based training and through the life of the dog. Um, in being, and I think, but it comes down to some of the things we're talking about here, which is like, I determine what's valuable to you. Like,
Yeah.
I'm helping you. Like, I'm manipulating all those things as you age, and because I want the power to bring your attitude back up when it's in the dumps, and I want
Yeah.
the power to suppress you when I need to, and
Yeah.
in the context of what we have moving right now, like, hey, if I restrain you, that thing out in front of you is more valuable, and I'm less valuable behind you, or whatever. I mean, and I'm getting on a bit of a tangent there in terms of value, but I think when we bring it to the steadiness sequence, and you're right, I tend to train more of this in drive. Like, I mean, it's essential to me to walk you out as I'm asking you to conceptualize what steadiness is as the dog, that you come into a heightened state of arousal immediately when I start this sequence, when we start the questing behavior. But I will, I'll do a lot of things as I'm building certain concepts, but the moment you're steady to shot and you're clean there for a long period of time, and I go, okay, this is the time where I'm going to break this dog out, then I never and I've shot several birds for this dog. The dog has a history of the shot eliciting chase.
Mhm.
Now I come out and I'll never put you downwind of a bird and shoot a bird for you and ask you to stand still. I will never, from a place of discipline, say you must stand still. I put you downwind of a bird, I flushed it, and I've shot it. And the first time I'm asking you to be steady to wing shot and fall, are you going to be in that scenario? It's always going to be a stop to flush, or it's always going to be, I've just got you in duration and position, and a bird goes up and I shoot it and you watch it fall and you don't get it.
So
And
like
that would be valuable for room service.
Yeah, and that's what so
Yes.
like at the seminar, that's exactly what we did, right? Is we set up a scenario where the dog is pointing a launcher that they know is there because it's been in the same spot every
Does it
repetition.
have a bird in it?
It does have a bird in
See,
it, but the dog doesn't have any scent,
Yeah.
right? So they just know that it's there because we brought them out the first time.
Okay.
We brought them to a stop with a check cord, right?
Yeah. So essentially, yes.
And then let gunners get out, launch the bird, shoot it, bring it to the dog. And so what I'm trying to show them is the backside of that picture.
Sure.
Again, out of drive because there isn't any scent involved there. So,
well, not necessarily out of drive. I think they're in drive. It's just now we're dealing in like layers and levels of drive.
yeah.
Right. So like the intent because this is what I think of point too, is like point is this state of anticipation.
Yeah.
And I think with most of our pointing breeds, and I think we see this in attitude, emotional state, and temperament in pointing dogs, I think I see a much higher frequency in pointing dogs of like general anxiety than I do in other types of dogs.
I would agree with that.
And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that they have been selectively bred to exist in a state of anxiety and point. And I think that's a natural part of being a bird dog, like caution. And so what anxiety may be the wrong word to use, because I think it conjures certain emotional states. But what I'm at, it's anticipation to the point of like,
you're right.
It's coming, it's coming, it's coming, right? And so I don't want the dog in that state the first time. I'm going to say from a place of discipline, you're not allowed to pursue this game.
Yeah, and we're not going to get through any of your
I
questions.
was just about to say I want to get to Randall on this before moving on because you haven't got to add anything. If there is anything to add, it sounds
Nate
like
and I are very similar just because we share the system. Yeah. So, and I have to ask Nate if I can say the system we use. I got to go back and look at my contract.
I'll be the guy that says it.
Yeah.
We're very similar, right? I'm like him. Dogs, we're coming out of drive, putting birds up, and a little different, but not too much, right? But are you marking through that whole thing, like using a marker
to tell the dog that I'm bringing something to him?
Yep.
I don't usually.
Okay. So I do. Like, I'll literally walk right up to the dog, mark them, and reward them in that position.
Would this be a duration marker?
No, this is a terminal marker, right?
Okay.
So like dog is completed duration, success approximate, small baby. We all know that, but like, what's amazing is the marker comes and their eyes pop, right? It's not the reward, to your point earlier. So very similar, just slight differences.
Yeah, and I think for me a lot of times in that situation, not only am I not marking, but I'm giving them a fetch command if I'm bringing a bird to them, because when I use reward markers, I don't care how my dog interacts with the reward, because my feeling about that is it's their reward. And so if I do things that make it less rewarding, then I'm kind of defeating the purpose. But when it's a bird, and actually, I think I got this idea from Jerry Bradshaw, and I probably am bastardizing it because I maybe didn't understand it well enough. But I did a video call with him one time, and I was asking questions about bite work because I feel like there's a lot of stuff you can use with that related to a lot of the work that we're doing. And I was just saying something about, do you use markers ever to like release a dog into a bite? And he's like, I never do that. Like, the bite will always be a cued behavior that has like a set of rules around it. And so anytime my dog puts their mouth on a bird after they've done force fetch, there is a set of rules associated with that. And the way that I've taught that, when I say fetch, I don't see the dog like, they don't pee a little, or anything like that, because I don't train in a way that it creates any sort of negative, emotional response.
I think that's, I think in a certain sense, and I don't want to I'm going to, at the risk of coming off as like obtuse, which, yeah, I've risked that pretty deeply this entire, like,
I haven't heard that word since Shawshank Redemption.
I don't think a bird is I don't think I mean, it absolutely has the power of reinforcement. I
So
don't think of it as a reward in the classical sense in the way that I do as a bite tug.
that was my next question: is will you switch rewards in? Because I will. I'll change that schedule
It's
all up.
something I would like to do more of.
Yeah.
It's something that I think if I'm going to talk in all this heady way,
Yeah.
then I think it probably is important for me to explore more differential reward stuff in the field.
I don't do any of that stuff either, but I would like to play with
There's a lot of
other types
preparatory.
of reinforced. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. But I think for me, what makes me feel like a bird is a really big reward is that the way that we prepare our dogs. When I bring that bird to their face, I can't see any iris on their
No.
eyes.
Well,
You know?
I mean,
It's their whole world.
and I guess that's the
you know?
point. Is like it's confusing to me, and it's my own fault that it's confusing to me. I mean, because I'm holding two conflicting ideas in my head. Is like once I give, and I guess I've always got rules around the tug, and so that's not fair. But I always want the dog to feel like they have the power to potentially possess the tug and own it. And I never want the dog. I don't say never. I mean, many a times on the way to, but I never want a finished dog to take complete ownership of a bird. Like I may give them the freedom of owning it for a moment, but I can, and I guess that's a tug as well. So it's not fair to say that. So yeah, it is a reward.
And I see that using tug or a tug, bite pillow, whatever you want to use, right? For those really anticipatory, anxious dogs that we were describing earlier, helps a ton because they really want the bird, right? That apple of their eye. That's what they want most. So like I'll get my reps in first with that. We'll get start making some headway, but then we'll start drive channeling down and switching behaviors and things like that, and then I will bring in this hierarchy and change the reward and say no, you
Yeah.
must, right, we must play this game. This is what you get this time, and put that on a variable schedule. And that has helped me a ton with some of those really anxious anticipatory dogs.
Yeah, and we do a lot of the same stuff that you would do to like build the willingness to kind of bring a tug back or to relinquish a tug to you. We
Yes.
do that stuff with birds too. So like prior to force fetch, I'll play tug with a bird with
Oh,
a dog
yeah.
a little
I
bit.
know, I've done
I
After
will
force fetch,
I will
you don't want to talk to me about this.
I will right, and then you bring it back to me. What even if I had to compel that happening, then you give it to me. I give it right back to you. Right, I'll mark and reward you by giving it back. You bring it back to me, and then I release you to hunt again so that you can find another one. So you start realizing like this thing I'm possessing right now is not the last bird on earth.
And I got to say this just since we're on that topic, and to me, the most profound or the greatest example I've ever had of that kind of interaction with whether it be a bird or a tug. In this case, a tug was a seminar I did with Michael Ellis years ago, and he did a video series with Learberg that was like the power of tug with your
Yep.
dog, and it's beautiful in regards
That
to
should be like
kinda,
required viewing for
yes,
anyone with a dog.
yeah. So
All right, so I need to write this down. We'll just have to revisit this in its own standalone episode because I know this is probably the third time it's come up.
This will be the most.
He's going to start moderating
requested
us like the
redo.
presidential debates. Cut off our
that
mic.
one question conversation is gonna get asked. Hey, do that again.
Yeah. Well, let's move on. Skip that one. All right. Randall, let's start with you on this one. I want you to define a soft dog. And do you think that dogs, generally speaking, today, genetically, are softer than what they were, say, 25 years ago?
I think the dogs of yesteryear, based on how they were being trained and handled and things like that, were harder dogs, right? There's something to be said for those dogs that went through the school hard knocks, and I only say that based on the bite dogs I've worked with. You came out of some of those prisons, man, like you were gonna make it, like you were gonna be fine. I could take you to combat and you'd be okay. And there is some element of that, I think, in the bird dog world. You're not going to combat with them, but I think if you can survive some of those heavy-handed, very stressful training regiments that of yesteryear, there's something to be said about that for those dogs. Where now You've got people that are a little more thorough, break things down much further, and teach the dog things first before we start making dogs really do things on drastic levels. And I think that eventually, yeah, you're going to see a little change, but I don't know that I wouldn't call it a bad thing, in my opinion, 'cause I think you're going to get a lot more good with it too. So,
So, what's your definition of soft dog?
man, that's such a tough one. I don't even know what I
There's
would
no right or
describe.
wrong. Just like, what's your gut feeling on it?
Low drive, man, low drive, and a dog that cannot push through any adversity whatsoever, right? So like they hit a hard problem, they say, I can't, I don't want to do this anymore. The hope's not worth the struggle in any case, right? That would be a soft dog for me. They're breaking down the moment that they perceive any sort of pressure they're unwilling for, right? Where the harder dogs, I think, they've got the spice in them and say, yeah, I'll I'll work through this, I'll push through this, I've got it. That's a tough one to describe for me.
Nate, what's your definition, and what do you think?
Uh, I think I I would agree that I think a soft dog is a dog that doesn't handle any amount of pressure well. And pressure could be from the handler using training tools or from the environment or I mean some dogs just like some people that they just existing it seems to be very difficult for them. And so I think that that's a good definition. What always concerns me when I hear, especially in like our space, the gun dog space, when I hear people say soft, is then when I watch them train, their application of pressure is not good. They don't teach their dogs anything first, and so at that point, I think that it's a word that often gets used to blame the dog for shitty training. What I think is more often than not what happens in our area. And my reason for saying that is because these dogs for generations have been trained primarily with pressure. And so, what you get from dogs that are selected, at some point, your selection is biased based on how you are training those dogs. And so, these dogs all handle pressure fine for the most part, I think. And so, when you see a problem there, I think usually it's not it's a problem with the way pressure is being applied or that the fact that they weren't really taught well beforehand. So I think that those are the issues. The other thing too is I think there are dogs that are sensitive that are not soft. So there are
Absolutely.
dogs that don't require a lot of pressure, but that's okay. The amount of pressure you're supposed to use is enough. And so if that dog's level that is enough is not a lot, then that's honestly good to me because that means you can go up from there if you need to as the arousal level goes up or if they're doing something they're not supposed to and the consequence for that infraction needs to be more severe. So I don't think that that's a bad thing. And then the last thing that I'll say, just because it's kind of my like it's my thing, is you have a lot more control over how your dog perceives pressure than I think a lot of people think that they do. But there's a lot of prep work that you need to do for that. And if people would do that work, then a lot of that conversation just doesn't come up anyway.
And I'm super glad you clarified the sensitive part because that was the next question I was going to ask for you to explain.
Yeah, and then the only other piece that I think connects to this is people will talk about if you have dopamine dogs or endorphin dogs, right? So the endorphin dogs are the dogs you give them a little, and then they pick them
Ah,
up a little bit. It's kind of like some people like to
yeah.
get choked or spanked or something, right? Just like you're into that stuff. And then there's the dogs that they are really driven by pursuit of reward, And so those are two different things, and that can be difficult for people too, because like you see like my draw, if I pull her out, I mean I smack the shit out of her all the time because she enjoys it. I mean she likes roughhousing, she likes getting pushed around, she likes getting like just like smacking her on her ribs and stuff and pushing her around, and she likes it. It's very reinforcing to her. So anything that I do with her, if I play tug with her and I smack her around a little bit, she likes it. But people see that and they're like, he's being mean to his dog.
You dog abuser.
I think
Yeah.
I think you can make a
Like,
little masochist out of most dogs.
yeah,
Like
it's
I
a,
think it's in all of us to some degree, and I do think yeah you can have a sensitive dog that's not a soft dog. Um, and I really like what Randall said about the hope not being worth the struggle. If I
yeah.
got that right.
Those
Mhm.
aren't my written. Someone else said that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
that is not my.
those are all.
You know where I got it from.
And we can like I think you can have I recently did one of my own podcasts about this like it just called resilience and I think that's a very important role a trainer plays is like developing resilience in a dog. And so yeah, I do think some dogs are objectively softer than others. Um and I think there's a genetic component to that for sure. Yeah, I mean some dogs are innately hard or soft.
Do you think they're more common now than what they were 25 years ago?
No. And I don't think, but I also don't think they were that much more common 25 years ago, right? I think that gets tossed around a lot. So I think a lot of it depends on what we're talking about. But I think if you just take the top of the games, um, I don't think retrievers are softer today. I think there are some differences in the way we train that could have a slight influence. You got to think like when you say 25 years, and I think we need to like recognize that if we call a generation for dogs 2 or 3 years, um, then maybe you know you're getting potentially 8 generations in there. I don't think that's enough for that kind of evolution of emotional state. Personally, like I even if you're really selecting for things, like I mean potentially, but maybe not. I don't think so.
Hmm.
Maybe 100 years, maybe 75, 50, potentially. Like, I mean, dogs have changed for sure. Um, I think e-collars have played a little bit of a role in things. But I think, like, we used to shoot dogs with 9 shot, in training. When I say we, I mean our predecessors. And, and the zeitgeist did not condemn that the way it would today. Um, uh, uh, so I think are we talking about breeding softer dogs? I think I don't know. I don't think so. I think a lot of people though we're more sensitive, and I think that makes us more sensitive to what the dog is going through, and we're less inclined to develop resilience in our dogs from the get go. And I think so. One thing I love about NAPOPO and that line of thinking is that developing resilience is built into it by making it like helping the dog have a relationship with pressure, quote unquote pressure, or allowing for that relationship to develop early. I think a lot of people, I think a lot of people don't exercise intent with that stuff early enough, and then they come to it later and they need to use it, and then a big part of that is training and drive and so on and so forth, and we can get into that, or we've already covered that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, to answer your question simply, I think we make a lot more out of we have softer dogs today than we did. I just think we have softer people today than we did.
Oh, I mean, I agree with you on that one.
Any last concluders on that one?
No.
All right. So this next one, you can't cop out and say personal preference because I mean that's you can say that about pretty much all of this stuff. But when it comes down to balancing obedience and building drive, the companion dog versus working dog, we've talked about it a number of different ways these past few days. We talk about it all the time to
I like this
where
question.
the average person coming into this space is going to have a little bit of both companion dog and working dog. but it seems to be kind of a sliding scale. You always end up with one side of the spectrum more so than others. So, how do we go about balancing the companion side with the working side?
You should do a whole podcast just on this.
Yep.
But I'll
Start it
I
off.
like this one. So I think a couple things. The first is I like to look at this as there are contexts in which the dog learns it's okay to express drive in certain ways, and there's other times when it's not okay. And so I think that at a certain point, you can have clarity there in a way that it's not that you have one or the other. It's just that like the way that I interact with my wife is different than I would interact with anyone else, right? The way that you talk when you're with your buddies at hunt camp is not the way you probably talk if you work in an office building, right? And so, like, we're all capable of kind of compartmentalizing those things to some degree, but it takes time to do that stuff, right? Like you say an off-color joke at a certain point with somebody, right? And you're feeling out, and this is part of like our socialization is figuring out like what you can say and do in different kind of situations. So I think that that's part of your training process, or should be. That's first. I think the second thing is a lot of times the conversation is, do I do drive building or obedience, or is there a sequence where that stuff has to happen? And I think in our world and in most of the when I say working dog right now, I just mean dogs that do stuff that they were bred to do world. Um, the common approach is to build drive first, and then you do obedience after that. And I would argue that you can bring drive along with obedience if you are a tactful trainer, and then you have less of the common problems that people have when they do the drive building first, and then they kind of try to use obedience to just sit on top of that big motor that they built, and you see that it causes trouble there. The last thing that I'll say about this, and this is a criticism maybe that I have, particularly in it seems to happen most often in the protection sports, but I see people that, man, I'm building a monster. I'm building a lot of drive. And then my goals, my aspirations are to get a PSA 3 on my dog. And that dog is always hurt. And so that dog never actually has the career in the sport that you wanted because you never taught them any sort of idea of self-preservation. And at a certain point, to me, that's the trainer's fault. So you created this situation where your dog is basically useless for your intended purpose because you prioritize drive to the point where you're like, man, my dog retrieved the metal pipe so hard they broke all their teeth. Man, my dog jumps over this palisade and they tore every ligament in all four legs. Like, you see that kind of stuff happen sometimes, and it just irks the shit out of me.
Oh, what a monster that.
In defense of that, and I will say this,
There you
man,
go,
because
Nick.
I have
Love it here, all right?
Yeah.
having, because I'm still into building
I
monsters.
knew I'd chap these guys' ass over that.
I'm still into building monsters. Number one.
Yep.
I've changed a little bit though.
Have you
right?
seen
So
that puppy right now?
if I take
I haven't met him yet. You keep telling me he's going to bite me.
He will.
compartmentalization is extremely important.
Mhm.
Like in the context of like, so if I take a dog, in my house and I go into the room where all the dogs are crated or kenneled, and it's the same ritual every time we go in there. I'm going to dress you, in whatever kit I'm going to dress you in, and we're going to walk out. If I take a right, the dog goes into a certain state, and if I take a left, it goes into a completely different state because it knows where it's going from that moment forward, right? And so that's the compartmentalization. If it's early phase stuff, and I take a left, we're walking out that door to the bird field, and I expect that dog to come into a drive state of some sort. If I take a right, we're going into the basement, and odds are you're jumping right on that place board, and you're not slinky about it. You just come in controlled and not aroused. But that said, to touch on that point of the protection sports guys, and just that, I think we do deal in genetics to and we can see changes. So this kind of goes back to the hard and soft dogs now, is like I see a lot of frenetic energy in Mal's today that I don't think I saw in Mal's 20 years ago.
What does frenetic mean?
Frenetic means like energy that has zero direction. Like it's a boiling tea kettle at all times,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
right? It's
Mhm.
like, and it's hard to get the dog to focus. I
Yeah.
see a lot less like dogs that can apply focus to specific tasks pretty quickly. Now that being
Yeah.
said, that's not fair. There's plenty that aren't like that. Um, and from a self-preservation side, it's like you don't have to make the monster is there, like in that 8-week-old puppy. And so you could take a more measured approach. And I think we got really into drive building stuff back in the day, maybe when we had less of that.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, I've watched dogs that had no business doing it uh, uh, from a history perspective, like try to bite a brick and break teeth. And you don't know why they do that, and I see some of that now. So I guess, the point being in protection sport stuff, like the dog's always hurt. There's probably, yes, there's an affect from those of us that were doing it 20 years ago that tell people they need to make their monster and not tell them when it's time to like control that and maybe uh, control themselves in that regard and
Mhm.
start tapering some of that back or developing focus. I think because I think we were coming from a generation that was telling us compulsion suppression, and we were doing a lot more. Uh, you always hear people talk about like in the early 80s, the defensive picture was so much better and you didn't have prey monsters. Well, like nobody was trying to make prey monsters back then. They were just like compelling dogs into obedience and then taking them to a guy that would smack them with a stick and get them pissed off at them. And so we got defensive pictures. Nobody was putting a dog on a harness or an agitation collar back in those days and like creating a lot of back pressure and loading dogs with maybe a little bit of a prong collar, like you talk about, the little masochistic loading that we do now. All those tricks came along later, and I think now the pendulum has swung to the point where that's the norm. Like we all start from that place,
Yeah.
at least in protection sport. I say we, and I don't practice that anymore, but I think that's a big part of it. And I think the breeding has shown that to some degree as well. Is like we want the crazier dog, and maybe certain things, um, for emotional states or lack of emotional stability is something that can that kind of dysregulation can be captured more easily in breeding. I don't know, but I definitely think I see that. And
Yeah.
so I think when we breed for drive, specifically prey drive, I think we can go overboard in that direction sometimes.
Yeah, and you
Like,
see it.
I dig
To
it.
be
Yeah,
fair, you
that's
see it.
fair.
You see it in a wide variety of disciplines. You see agility dogs that can't hit their contacts on different, like, different platforms. So they got like the blue and the yellow parts of those things, and you lose points if they don't touch the certain parts of that stuff. And I think like a lot of that comes from there's a lot of enthusiasm in that work, but then they start skipping some of these control elements because it's a training issue, right?
for sure.
I mean, is really what all this is. I think you see this in like a lot of people really like a bold water entry, right? They want to see
Yeah.
like the full send,
Yeah.
right? The dog's floating in the air before they splash in the water, and for me, like I don't hunt places where I really want my dog jumping in the water like that because
Yeah.
I'm hunting
You get
like
beaver
wood duck
cuttings.
holes
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So it's just an observation that I have that I think sometimes there's a lot of that there's a lot of one side of it, and then they're not really bringing the control along in the way that they could. And I think a good person to point to see how you can bring control along and not have it impact drive is Pat Nolan,
Sure.
right? Like you watch the stuff that he does with young puppies. He starts capping from the very beginning. He's putting a treat down on a soup can down the hallway, and then he shows the puppy that happens. He comes back, he holds the puppy. The puppy's, get off me. Let me go get my food. He waits till that puppy just settles for a second, and then he lets him go. Right. And so, like, he's building some elements of control from the very beginning. And I think you'd be very hard it'd be very hard for you to say that his dogs don't have all of the drive
it's
and
your-
stuff that
I'm
they
glad
your
you said it
flavor,
because
though.
Pat's dogs always look really stable to me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like he gets the promptness of the cue, but they never look over aroused.
Yeah.
You know, like that's a really interesting thing you say that because I agree. Like,
And I think that's where it comes from.
yeah.
Randall,
I mean, he starts with the conceptual stuff small as little puppies, right? And like that, I'm always going to err on the side of dry building, right? But that's who I am. Like, I like spicy, slightly, like,
Unhinged.
slightly, right? Like if I could, I've said it a number of times on this show, like, if I could go get a Dutch Shepherd that would point birds, I would do it. Like,
Yeah.
I like that. That's what I like. So, I will always err on the side of drive building, but along the way, like we've said in this conversation, is in certain contexts, yes, there we'll begin shaping and teaching and even putting pressure to things and some things proofing them out, but maybe not yet in the bird field,
Yeah.
right? So like they know it, they understand it, but I'm not going to ask for it out there.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not yet. I'm still building that monster out here in the field. I want more gas here.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean I have to have an absolute ass in the
Yeah.
house,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's the biggest part where people mess up, and just specifically the bird dog world. It's like, oh well, I'm drive building, so I can't do any obedience. Well, absolutely not. We should be, because I need to get my pressure languages taught early and all these other things. Do it. Just keep your context clear of when and where we're doing these things, and it's worked.
This is supposed to be a trainer fight, not like Nate against dog training in general. But I just like you see certain stuff that just irks me a little bit. Like I think a thing that I see is missing a lot now with a lot of trainers is the stewardship element. Like that you're a steward for the dog, and so when I see these things like it's the drive building at the cost of health, or I see like there's dogs that they have a very high level of training, but they have to be muzzled at the vet. Like there's certain things like that, and like the dogs that you were dealing with, in your prior profession, that's a different use case. So maybe there's certain things that there's certain acceptations that you're going to make because of the job that dog has. But like if I have a sport dog of any kind,
Totally different.
the idea that I can't have that dog go to the vet and not wear a muzzle, like I have a problem with that if you're a trainer.
Well, and that's why like my view of this gets skewed a little bit, because I did that side of things. So like that's what I was exposed to, and I like
Yeah.
that. So
and I think like I mean it's a really tough one, man, because
See, we're actually fighting now. You see
yeah,
that?
and I think because we're getting into protection dogs, and this doesn't matter at all for bird dogs or retrievers or flushers because there's no place in my opinion where defensive aggression towards a human should ever be acceptable with any of those dogs
in the sporting group.
in the sporting group. Like there's obviously like a congenital predisposition to this.
Yep.
With specific breeds.
Yeah.
Especially off specific lines.
I'm glad that
Like-
you just put a difference between sport dogs and like
Yeah.
legit street working canines.
Well,
'Cause
then,
some people
no.
are going to be upset about
Well, no,
that
because
when you
there's like
say
I
that.
loved Mouse off the Baskai line, right?
Yeah.
Like so that line in particular, and what like the French ring guys would call old Belgian lines, like
Yeah.
But like there was a very civil side to those dogs, and it was a genetic predisposition.
But Grayson, if a dog can handle the pressure of PSA 3, and you're telling me they can't get a fucking shot at a vet,
Well, so I mean, but here's the thing, and then the problem. I agree, and this is these dogs. We're talking lines that predate PSA 3.
Sure.
We're kind of getting back to hard dog, soft dog.
Yeah, we are. I
I'm
mean,
just saying.
yeah, I mean, and I mean, because now we also like, I can, when we talk sport, sports are patterned, and if a specific sport rewards a specific picture, and we're building dogs with that sport, Like if this dog has, and I don't think PSA is a great example of this, to be honest with you. I think Schutzen pre-IPO
Okay.
is a good example of this,
Yep.
where a defensive picture had real value, and and people knew what they were looking at back then. Because now people are very good at creating a quote unquote defensive picture, and back then they weren't. So it goes back to like the pendulum swinging. Like you needed a dog that actually had a predisposition to want to eat this man. Um, and what triggers that, and like what kind of thresholds are we dealing in when like, and so like if a guy comes up to me and wants to poke a needle in me and I don't understand it, like I haven't been desensitized to this in any way,
Yeah.
like that should, by all accounts, create a defensive picture.
Well,
Like,
But I guess
but
my,
the
my but my
training-
point is that's the stewardship piece for me.
Sure,
Is that like, and
sure,
if you're
that's fair.
if you're a trainer
you have a
that can train a
responsibility
picture,
to prepare the dog.
yeah,
for that.
right,
Yes.
exactly.
Yeah.
And there's nothing that happens at a vet that you can't do picture training for.
No, I
but
no, I
if
agree.
you look at the
100%.
training and the lifestyle that the dogs of yesteryear grew up in, it's that hard knock school that I'm
Sure,
talking about.
sure.
I mean,
And again,
crazy
I
Dutchman
tried.
beating you with a rawhide hammer, like
I tried to delineate like the dog that their job is to, rip someone's bicep off their arm, and the dog that is going and playing a sport on the weekend.
But they got those dogs of yesteryear got trained in that real heavy-handed
Sure.
way, especially overseas.
Mhm.
And yeah, I mean, you're going to put a dog into defense for just your presence alone
in
because they're going to fight.
all fairness, KNPV is not, I mean, in today, I think you could call it a sport.
Sure.
It's not. The whole idea is it's a certification for a breeding dog to produce police dogs
Sure.
or produce working dogs. And if that level of defensive aggression that could swing between good training and good genetics or bad training and bad genetics, like those people, I think, saw themselves having a responsibility to produce a hard,
Yeah.
sharp dog.
And they
Yeah.
aired on that side.
And so and today you have a hard time. Like a lot of people tell you, man, this is straight genetics. I don't believe it is. I think you're right. I think you can take a dog with a gene.
We went way off bird dogs.
I was about to say, let's bring it back home to bird dogs.
I'm enjoying it.
Sorry.
Let's try and sum it up the best way we can, because we know it's a balancing act and it depends on your preference. It depends on your dog. All the stuff that we can provide as disclaimers. Let's try and sum it up for that person that has the puppy, that they have one person over here saying nothing but drive, build, 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 and then you have the person over here saying you have to live with the dog, that you live with it more than you hunt with it. How does somebody brand new with the puppy, how do they
I
start?
don't know anybody that says the drive building and that's it, and you should only lean in that. I don't know anybody that would say that is making an informed statement that probably doesn't have like kennel dogs. It would if I
Yeah, I
if
agree
I'm
with you
painting
there.
with like a really broad brush.
yeah.
I just think like practically speaking, you're going to hunt with your dog however many hours you're going to do that for, and that is nowhere near the amount of hours that you're going to be riding in the car with your dog or living in the house with the dog or whatever the case may be. So what most people need is a really good companion dog that can hunt. What most people don't need is the like absolute monster hunting dog, but you can't take them anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's, I mean, it's it's tough. It's not. I mean, it's not, because you're right. It's tough because it depends. It depends on who you're dealing with. When we say companion dog, like you could qualify my first Mal as a companion dog, but I was obsessed with training that dog. And I have some clients that are. I'm a big proponent of like lifestyle management and making sure that every interaction, if you intend to have a pet dog that's a hunting dog, that every interaction in the house at some point, like early anyway, happens with intent. And so I don't like, so the first thing I tell my clients is like, hey man, if this dog's 100% unsupervised, it's in a crate. If it's semi-supervised, you should be willing and able to get to wherever it is. I like a kind of a 28-day habit building program where you're on a place board when you're semi-supervised. So if you're like working from home, you're cooking, you're doing whatever, um, that dog's in a place where you have the ability to control it and correct it. And then only when you're willing to give it 100% of your undivided attention is it loose on the ground. And the only reason is it ensures that every interaction you have is with intent. Um, it doesn't mean you're going to be well, it does. It's going to make you a better trainer. It's going to make your dog a better dog. But then you have the opportunity to contextualize your drive building. Like you can go out and you can practice that stuff and you can get very serious about it. And you can get serious about it to the point where that is the thing you put forward. But in the house, you have management. And so I think if you do that, you can rely less on, and I don't think you need to, but I think you can rely less on worrying about your formal obedience, um, and still have uh, get to a place of general compliance because you're not allowing that drive building side to spill into your household lifestyle. If that makes sense.
I think for the average person, every dog trainer is going to have a different opinion on this because we all attack the problem differently. Even though we're attacking the problem differently, we're all getting to the same goal, right? There are people that are doing NEPOPO or compulsion based or whatever, right? And they're still achieving titles and winning, right? So like you're getting there. So I don't think the trainers will ever agree on it, but for like the average person, if you can do what Grayson just said and build your mini monster, but have context in
What?
certain environments and
Yeah.
say, hey, in this environment, that's not an option.
But it doesn't,
right?
and it really doesn't transfer from bird dog to bite dog stuff and the reason I'm saying all that is because if I had a Malinois puppy today that I intended to play PSA with tomorrow, and it's 8 months old, and it decides to grab my jeans and shake, like I can admonish it a little bit, but I'm not going to punish that behavior.
Sure.
Like I'm
It's
just
it's
not.
the same thing as when we're talking about a young bird dog picking things up in the house. You don't want
Yeah,
to
the
diminish
sock,
the retrieve drive.
yeah.
Yeah, the socks, shoe, whatever. Like, you want to create that control, and
I'm
you
much
don't.
more inclined
But
to say, don't do that with my sock. Like I don't know why. Like
yeah,
I'm gonna force fetch that dog and it's gonna be fine. I'll get what I need out of it and it's
Yeah.
clean. But like I do worry with a bite dog. Like I don't want to make it. There's part of me that was just and it's just. I'm sure it's cultural. Like I'm sure it's just an affect I have from those days.
the good thing is
Like,
anybody listening to this isn't getting a bite dog.
yeah, yeah. And
I
you
might
should.
get a bite dog. I might end up
It's
with
a nice
another
way to
bite
say
dog.
like, hey, can we keep it on topic?
Randall's
I did-
bite dog is a poodle pointer though. So
They'll bite you.
the last two thoughts I have about this are, Grayson, the key piece to what you're saying is that you have goals and you have a plan that leads to that goal. And so as long as you know what you want at the end and you have a path to get there, then I think you're fine. And it's fine for people to want whatever they want. My background and the environment that most of my clients live in, I think informs the way that I feel about this stuff. And so here's my general opinions about this stuff. Your dog is a liability before they're anything else. The evidence of that is they tear up your shoes, they eat your neighbor's cat or chickens or whatever. You're the one that cuts the check for that stuff.
Fair.
And so, especially when you have a lot of clients living in the city, it's not like you have a rural property where the dog can just kind of roam and do whatever and really probably live the life that most dogs should. I think ideally probably get to live, right? They get to explore and have a lot more freedom and things like that. But what's happening instead is all these people live on top of each other, and when you are packed in with other people like that, I think one of your primary responsibilities is to not infringe on other people's ability to go about their daily life.
But you
I agree 100% with that.
yeah, I don't disagree with you, but like we can use tools in management to get by if we're still
Yes.
like I can still build a monster mal and not get my neighbor bit, right?
Yes.
Like I have tools to manage that.
You can.
It
but
comes down to the person and their understanding and common sense and application of.
And I think that's the framing of it is like Grayson's giving and you're giving these informed perspectives based on people that are talented at what they're doing, right? And so like again, I think two things that when I'm answering these questions, I'm answering questions on the Gun Dog It Yourself podcast, not the what can Grayson Geyer do and get away with, or what can Randall do and get away with, right? So I
The
think
average person can do it.
that's the main thing for me. And I think the average person with any dog of any type that does any sort of work, most of them, at least with their first one, are probably a little over their head, you know?
Yeah, and you do have a responsibility, like, and it's a silly phrase, but to have your dog be a good citizen, if depending on your lifestyle, like, and that's if you can't have that, then you can't have the bird dog of your mind's eye,
Right.
like, so you have to make exceptions for your lifestyle, and knowing that going into it.
So moving on to the next one, we're going to go into the land of pressure here, and this is I don't want to spend too long on this one, but I know
Good luck.
right?
Where Nate and I are basically the same again.
No, actually on this one, no.
Hopefully, okay, cool.
Preference when it comes to the type of pressure on force fetch.
Oh, this is a
Ear
great question.
pinch, toe hitch, e-collar, none of the above. Let's start with, I want to start with Grayson on this one.
Okay, well, let's start by saying let's not call it type of pressure. Let's just call
Pressure.
let's call it to me, it's just a different contact point to apply pain. So I don't like the word pressure in this scenario because I think I think this is one of those places when we talk pressure that uh, we're convoluting the language on purpose, and so we are administering pain to get a result. So it's negative
Yeah.
reinforcement, right? And we call it discomfort. What that would be fair, but I think this is where I don't like the word pressure because I think it's like this is where I feel the context is that we're trying to avoid some sort of conversation that is like what is negative reinforcement.
I actually want to stop and explore that for a second because I
Sure.
think it's important in this context. When we use the word pressure, can you give me an example of a positive pressure? Like that we could use that the dog would interpret as positive? Because I understand what you're saying, but like when we get into the whole semantics and language of it to where like
It's like let's think of stress, right? Like so stress, like I think there can be eustress and distress, right? So like there are like trying to achieve an objective can be eustress, like and achieving that objective like in the process somewhere along the line that can be a sort of stress that has um, a desired outcome, and then we can avoid, and then you could argue that avoiding and escaping, or escaping and avoiding pressure could lead to a positive outcome, and of course, or a desired outcome, and then of course, if we add a positive reinforcer to the back end of that, then we can drastically increase the value of the positive reinforcer on the other side. All that said, like in force fetch, when we just to answer the question as deliberately as possible, like I don't think it matters in the least, other than the mechanics of the motions you're trying to perform, where pain comes from, as long as the dog has a clear signal that they can escape and eventually avoid the pressure.
Even if you're using such low levels that would not be painful,
Yeah, I mean it's like, but
you
it's
would
all
still
about
qualify it as pain.
yeah, because it's all about perception, and like if it's not worth avoiding, then who cares? Like so, I like the word pain because it just gets even though it's probably exaggerated, it gets all, pardon my language, all the bullshit off the table. Like I'm not trying to avoid the conversation with you. Like is it pain? At some point it's going to be pain. If you're willingly doing it, it's not a force fetch. Right?
I agree with that.
yeah,
so
fair
like
enough, yeah.
So you have to be avoiding something.
Yeah.
You have to be escaping something.
Right.
In order to have negative reinforcement, it's got to be worth escaping.
But there's discomfort that people will
but
escape.
your truck dinging until you put your seatbelt on is negative
Yeah,
reinforcement.
of course. I mean, sure, it is, and like being cold and putting on a jacket is negative reinforcement.
Yeah.
Discomfort,
there-
annoyance.
Being hot and taking off a layer is negative reinforcement. That said, there are levels to this, and it is a force fetch,
Yes.
Right.
right? And I think, and so I personally, in my opinion, if I'm force fetching a dog, whether I'm doing it in a way that would be consistent with modern training methods such as NAPOPO, or I'm going straight to the table and throwing a tow hitch on, which I do most often. Um, by the end of the process, it will have been pain. Because I always want my dog to be a willing participant. That said, uh, I'm going to narrow the options to the point that you're going to perform a behavior you would rather not perform.
Mm.
And I want the retrieve to be that thing at some point. I want to see some resistance and I want to see you overcome it.
So just to clarify, tow hitch is your primary
Yeah,
form of
no, tow hitch. Yeah, always start with tow hitch. I just like it. I think it's very convenient for like the way I can use my left hand to pull on your toe and my right hand to deliver a bumper,
There you go.
and that makes it easy for
Nate,
me.
what's your preference?
When I first learned force fetch, we used ear pinch. So the force fetch that I used initially was Keeler method, and that is an ear pinch against a chain collar is the way. So your thumb's on one side, the ear is between your thumb and a chain collar. As far as which form of pressure I think is best or I like the most. I agree with Grayson that I don't think it matters. I think the important thing is that your dog understands what it means, and so if I'm pinching the ear or I'm pulling on a toe hitch or I'm using the slip lead, just does the dog understand what they need to do to make that pressure turn off is the most important piece. I think each one gives you different benefits. So ear pinch, and the first dozen dogs that I force fetched, I didn't force fetch because they were sporting dogs. I force fetched them because they were biting dogs, like biting people and weren't supposed to. And so for me, one of the best ways to help address that was that's my mouth and I decide what goes in it and comes out of it and when those things happen, and you don't get to use it any way other than that, right? And so like when I can isolate a behavior with the dog's mouth, I felt like that was almost like that was my finishing when I was working with pet dogs that I was dealing with aggression issues.
I really like that.
So I found a lot of value in that, and what I like about ear pinch there is if I pinch your ear and you turn your head to put your teeth on me, I grab the other one, and now you can't turn your head anywhere because I'm holding both sides, right? I got left and right turn signals now, right? And so that was what I think the value of the ear pinch. I can also push the dog towards the object if I have an ear pinch, which I like. It's more mobile if I still have to use it when the dog is off the table and on the ground. Toe hitch, what I think is cool about toe hitch, and I could count on, you could cut off most of my fingers and I could still count how many times I've used a toe hitch. But one of the things that I think, like a lot of training is moving from elicited behavior to having it be discriminate. So the first time I put pressure on you, you may cycle through a wide variety of behaviors trying to turn that pressure off, but it's the one thing that I want that is when pressure should actually turn off. And once the dog experiences that one or more times, then that goes from being an elicited response to a discriminate one where they go, I know what the right answer is, so next time I'm prompted with this pressure, I will just do that thing. And And what is cool about toe hitch is that I think it's the one where you see it most obviously. So here's what I mean. Most dogs, if I apply discomfort to them, they are going to try to put their mouth on the source of that discomfort. So if I pull on your toe and you turn your head to bite at your foot, and that's where that pipe happens to be, then that is elicited. It's just in the way, right? So maybe you grab that. And then when I can pull on your foot over here and you bite the thing over here, there is no question that you understand exactly what you're supposed to do to turn pressure off. And it kind of removes some amount of my influence that I see when I teach people to use ear pinch, is they do too much of the work for the dog. The slip lead, like in the Napopo unforced force fetch, when you see a lot of guys do that, their presentation is always from the front. And then when you look at this, the types of dogs, right, protection sport dogs, that was really where that system came from. The whole idea there is if I'm a decoy and you're being chewy on your bite, I can use my force fetch to mean you got to grab a hold of that thing and settle down. And so the decoy may be the one that's manipulating that. And so then it's the same picture there, right? So there's like a use case for each one of those things that I think is informed based on what your purpose is. And this is why training is so cool to me, because we're talking about one behavior and then we have a bunch of options there, because if I think forward enough to what my use case is, I might pick different ones. The fact of the matter for me is, when I teach this stuff to people, I tell them they can use whatever application of pressure that they want, and then we're going to end up transitioning to e-collar at some point anyway. For most people now, I am teaching some form of collar pressure, because I find that for most people it's a lot more palatable than the other pieces. And the last piece that I would say is I agree with Grayson. At some point, it is compulsion, it is pain compliance, but the way that we do this stuff, if we prepare the dog correctly, right, is like at first, especially if I'm doing it in this unforced force fetch way where I shape it first, the presentation of this object, you put your mouth on it, I mark and reward you. And then that pipe showing up, I already know you have a discriminant response. You know what you're supposed to do when you're given that cue. And so then when I pressure, release, and then present that cue, now you know that this application of pressure predicts this behavior and this discriminant response you already know. And so then when I start applying pressure and then providing the pipe, and then you grab the pipe and then pressure turns off, now I'm dabbling in the dark arts of negative reinforcement. And then we do that long enough where the pressure is predictive of, basically it's a signal to do work. It's a cue, basically. It's a cue to do the work, and then you're going to get paid. And then over time, we manage hope and struggle. But what I am doing is I'm turning the heat up on that pressure, whether that's with whatever collar I'm using, or the ear pinch, or the toe hitch, or the e-collar, to the point where I am doing pain compliance. But because I've prepared my tools well enough, when I mark and pay you, the payoff was still valuable enough for you that you are like, that was a little spicy, but I'm good, right? And so that's part of, I think, like the secret sauce to the way that I'm trying to train every dog that I put my hands on, is I want to be able to put my foot in your ass, but have you not get pouty about it at all. And a lot of that comes from the preparation work on the front end.
Is it?
Yeah.
I would. And I'm sorry, Randall. Like I don't.
No, you're
but
good.
I've got like a.
You gotta get it out.
wanna
I got to
hear
get it out
I
while
wanna hear
while we're in it, because I agree. Like I agree that putting a lot of time and effort into developing a discriminant response as clearly as possible and having clear signals is important, and important and valuable. Um, there is something in me that likes to deny the elicited portion at some point and say you have to make a decision. Here's an unclear signal, and a lot, and I don't know why, but there's value. And so one thing I've always said is that I think force fetch is a master class in escape avoidance, and I think there's a There's a value to force fetch that goes beyond uh, retrieving. And I've
Yes.
always said this, like
Yes.
in like a resilience kind of thing. I have seen quote unquote soft dogs go on a table and 3 weeks later come off a table a completely different animal.
Yes.
And I like to see dogs sort through very hard problems, not from a place of motivation, but from a place of escape avoidance, and discover that they're stronger than they thought they were and gain confidence.
I agree with everything you said. I just don't know why the motivation and the escape avoidance are mutually exclusive.
I don't think they are. I don't think they're mutually exclusive because I think you can accomplish the same thing. And maybe there's a bit of a sadist to this. I don't think there is. I think there's value. I don't know why.
Well, I think we get back into the territory of like, what are we capable of versus the average gun dog it yourself guy.
Well, and that's 100%
You
true.
know,
But
I wouldn't advise the average person
a
to
lot
do
of the
that.
structure in the system that we're using is to make like the use of pressure as safe as it can be. And again, this is a place where like I really admire you as a trainer, and I think that what happens a lot of times is like everything that you're saying I don't really disagree with. I just don't think like most people that you turn a dog back over to or that you're going to instruct, unless they're there with you and can do the work step by step with you, and you're there when you hit those weird sticking points, and
Yes.
you're like, okay, so now we're in a spot where the dog's not really sure what to do, but we've started applying pressure, and so now basically we have to live here until the decision is made. Like somebody needs to be coached through that, because if they're not,
Well, then
what will happen
frustration sets
100% of
in
the
and-
time is
Yeah, so
pressure
let me
turns off at the wrong
throw my
time.
disclaimer in there, please. Uh, not only do as I say, do as I do. Not only do as I do as I say, but or do as I mean sometimes.
Yeah.
But in this particular, I am talking specifically about myself in certain scenarios with specific dogs. Like I like cleanliness and I like crispness and I like a certain picture. Um, and I'm not just being a sadist when I do this. I don't I can't completely describe it, and I need to put some thought into why I think there's value in in trying to get a dog to sort through this as beat the pressure.
You're making a resilient
I agree
dog
with
is what
everything
you're
you're
doing.
saying. I
Yeah.
think so like for me, like with our puppies, right? We set up these little obstacle courses for them, and they have to work through a bunch of environmental discomfort, and we really don't give them any help when they do that, and they don't I guess they know that there's a reward for them at the end of it, but what they learn very quickly is like if they quit or give up, they don't eat right
Yeah,
then.
yeah.
And then that might only be like 2 hours before we give them another shot in those situations. But my point is I agree very much that building that resiliency in the dogs and having them understand that
It's not just
like
building it. It is like there is a bit of a crucible aspect to this that's not we're not and again, this is not every dog. And I can't tell you why. And there's just certain dogs that get on the table, and I'm like, all right, man, today is your day. You're gonna learn something about yourself. Um, and whether and it's completely intuitive.
Mhm.
I want, first things first. Like, I'm never doing this cold. Like, you're getting on and off the table willingly. You're happy. We're getting up there. We're moving. Gloves in the mouth. I do a lot of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then a specific dog is going to show me right away that, especially if they have a propensity towards learned helplessness, if they try it, like, and they really not just clam up, but I believe that they're milking the system to some degree.
Sure.
That it's just like, hey man, here, there's one way out, and you don't know it yet, but you're going to find it
Hmm.
in this
So
moment.
let me ask, how does this change based on the different type of pressure or pain.
Well-
Whether it's an ear pinch, toe hitch,
Well, I mean,
the
it's
slip
gonna.
lead or e-collar. Like, how does that change this perspective? Like, I
Uh,
agree. Everybody
Well,
agrees,
I mean,
but
but
where
I'm
does it fall in line here?
yeah, and I want to add. I sorry, I
no,
can't
no,
help but
please.
ask. How do you weigh the fallout of handler conflict with all of that?
So I'm deliberately creating handler conflict, and and so I guess that's the thing, and like I can't, I would never.
I can see it with a learned helplessness dog. I get it. Like, hey, buddy, you got to figure this out,
Well, no,
right?
it's it's not a dog that's demonstrated necessarily learned helplessness. It's a dog that's showing me like, hey,
They have the propensity
I'm
for it.
looking for ways out of this that aren't necessarily the way out. I'm looking for any. It's not every time because certain dogs are going to look for other ways out, and they're going to hit a state of panic that's not going to be productive. There are dogs that are going to overcome that in that moment, and we end up with like a very poignant singular learning event.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then bam, like the same way we get a cheat code when we've put a lot of time and effort into shaping, there's a cheat code where it's like I overcame the hardest thing I've ever done in my life right there in that moment, and now I have the confidence to move forward
And if they don't
quickly.
overcome,
And I tackle that early with that specific dog. Now that being said, I do want to get to your point, which is what do I think the difference in the contact points is? For me personally, Nate touched on a lot of it with the toe hitch in terms of it goes. That's an immediate way to get to discrimination. I think because you can't reach your toe sometimes, like depending on how I'm manipulating you. There's only one thing you can reach. It's
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
I can make that your way out.
Yeah.
Um, if ear pinch, I think, and for me personally, I have a propensity to apply some forward pressure, some like a mechanical force forward, and I don't like it because I want the dog. Not and there's times where I could see value in it, but like for me personally, I would rather the dog actually fight against the mechanical force to get to that. The place I see value in my ear pinch is usually after my ground transition, usually after my collar pressure, where I just want a personal touch at the water's edge or something. And like I feel like my collar pressure there could be confused for like water entry stuff if I've done force to water or something like that. So it's easier for me to grab a collar and say, no, I want this in your mouth. I'm not trying to force you to water. I'm not trying to make you heal. I'm not trying to make you do anything else. Don't worry. In the moment, I can grab your collar, pinch your ear, and you know exactly why that's happening if I've introduced it to some degree. But that being said, don't do as I do. Like do as I say
Yeah.
on this one. Like you're playing in pretty murky waters there, and you're creating conflict on purpose. And I don't think that's a good thing for your average GDI wire to do. But I do think at some point that there's some value in having an unclear picture and having the dog find clarity.
See, so like my background in Keeler, like so the way that would work, I think the reason why I don't think about it that way is because we're kind of building up to that all along.
Yeah.
Like there's applications of pressure there, and the dog never knows what they mean at first, and so
Yes.
you're kind of you're doing progressively more difficult things. So we start with long line work. I'm moving away from you, and all you have to do if my long line is 20 feet long is you need to move 1 inch. If you're 19
19 and
feet
11
11
inches,
inches,
yeah.
right,
Yeah.
then you are comfortable again. And then we go to healing, which is you get plus or minus 2 feet from what I consider ideal, what Bart would call potato healing position,
Yes.
right? It's like it's a flat heel, but you have to stay in that spot. And so we took and the way that it works basically is like if you have a 15-foot long line, you're giving the dog 5 feet away from you before you're turning and moving the other direction. So they
Yes.
basically get a third of the line. When you switch to a 6-foot leash, they still get a third of the line. So now they get 2 feet of room to move around before they receive negative reinforcement to put them back in the right position. After that, we start working on sit. So I'm pulling up on your collar and pushing down on your butt to get you to sit. You don't necessarily know what that means at first. Most dogs lock up when you do that first, right? And then the only way that you get out of that is to sit. And then we work on stands. If I was going to work a pointing dog through this work, I would either omit the sit until much later, or I would equally basically put the dog in a sit or a stand as we come to a stop from healing, so that one isn't more,
Sure.
it doesn't have a bigger reinforcement history than the other. After that, we go to downs. Downs, the way you do downs in Keeler is you have the collar behind the dog's head cinched up tight, your forearms running down their back, and then you basically pull their front feet out from under them and you lay on top of them.
Sure.
So you want to talk about like the kind of like very personal kind of there's a bit of subordination there, right? Like the I think the discussion that you're having at force fetch with most dogs I've had in the down already,
Sure.
some of that, and then we kind of continue through the rest of that novice level work, and then by the time we get to the retrieve in Keeler, we start with I open the dog's mouth and I place a pipe or a buck into their mouth, right? And so we do that for a while, and then but what they're still looking to see before you ear pinch is we cinch that collar up tight and hold it, that choke chain, and then I touch that pipe to that dog's lips. And if I
Really
got to
good.
stay there for the next 3 hours,
Yeah.
right? But you don't get out until you put that pipe in your mouth. But we don't start ear pinch until you show me that this cue is it gives me a discriminant response,
Yeah.
and then we apply pressure because anybody like Keeler is one of the most, I think, like vilified ways of training
It is.
in modern day. And the thing that I always try to articulate to people is it's still one of the most fair. Even if you don't like the way that pressure is applied, that's fine. But like even there, for me, the dog showing you I know what I'm supposed to do before I'm putting heat to them that's going to force them to do it, to me is more fair.
Yeah, and I guess, and I guess it's unfair for me to say exactly. And I have created a history because before I ever do that, before I ever ask a dog to discriminate between all the other things it shouldn't do and the one thing it should do, like we have gone through a traditional hold conditioning type of deal.
Yep.
And
And if that puppy came to you younger, you nurtured a natural retrieve, I would assume also.
I would, but more I'm dealing in just mouth mechanics at some point, and it's like, there are dogs that I need to go to the touch the lip, and I'm doing it with a tow hitch. What I'm really looking for really quickly is to discriminate that object's over here. And I want to make that jump as quickly as possible and get that shit out of the way. Like, and it's not, now I could teach it and make it a lot easier.
Yeah.
Right? Like, but there's something to be said for that dog that goes, okay. Like,
Fine. All
like,
right.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know.
I think it just for me, there's just certain dogs that, and this is again one of these things where like it's a read that you make as a trainer.
Yeah.
There are certain dogs that I need that dog to know I'm making you do this, and
Yes.
like I can make you do things and you don't have a say in this. And then there's other dogs where the only time I think I'm really doing what you're talking about, where I want to see the dog work their way through hardship without really having
Yeah.
and like having the answer in advance. Most of those things for the dogs that we're talking about in the context of this podcast, most of that's environmental. It's navigating cover, stuff in the water, right? Birds spurring you or whatever, like that kind of stuff. It's
I will say, I think I made a post on this, and I'm pretty sure you actually commented on it, and I don't remember now, but I ended up in this situation.
It was probably really insightful.
The first, it was extremely, the first dog I ever shaped a retrieve with, and then added my pressure in my closest approximation to what an Apopo unforced force fetch would be based on what I've gathered from the information I've taken off the internet, was my puppy Ripple, and it was beautiful, and it was so clean and so clear all the way through the process. And one day on Forced to Pile, it wasn't that bad, but I was unhappy. I recognized, like, you know what? There's still, it's never been doing the thing you don't want to do.
How much what we would call conflict management, what I think most people would just call proofing,
Yes.
is done in the like throughout your force fetch process and force to pile. Like how often is there there's some draw that he would want to do something else instead, where you get to say, that's not allowed, and I'm making you do this thing that you want.
It ends up happening. I mean, a lot of that happens through. Honestly, there are moments. There's these little bumps in the road. I would say it's less about competing motivator and more about I don't want to do this and I'm looking to escape it in the moment.
But isn't that part of what forced to pile you're supposed to get from that
Yes,
too?
and to me, yeah. Like, so
Yeah.
you get a dog that like tries to squirt out a different direction. A lot of times I end up with like heel issues. I mean, there's normal parts of it for me, so I don't concern myself with them. I could probably work around them.
Yeah.
With dogs that you end up hot spotting heel, you create some no going and you force through it, and now the dog doesn't want to come in clean to heel, and then you go, okay, well here's the deal, you don't have to do that, but you're gonna go, and now you're gonna have to do that and go, and eventually it's all clean.
To me, two things. The first thing is what I guess I'm not
Well, hold on. Let me I'm going to interrupt this because we'll just spend 2 freaking episodes on this
Damn,
one topic.
I was
And
getting into that.
well, I was going to Randall because we haven't even heard his answer.
I know. I'm so sorry.
No,
I'm so sorry.
no, because I was gonna like, to your point, you had a problem at force to pile, right? Like, and I stand with Nate of like, that's to be expected. That's going to happen. For me, force fetch means just bite this. That's the command, and I know I'm going to have conflict when I hit the ground because the dog has other options now. I don't control your environment like I did on the table or in the box. Now you have options, and this invites the opportunity for that. So, I mean, for me, it's to be expected when we go to pile. So, I you can use some tools or manage your environment to try and limit some of that, but for me, that's just expected. I know I'm going to have to say, hey, no, you really have
well,
to do
I think
this.
the other thing for me, man, is I'm always going to start all that stuff on a line. So even when I start forced to pile, I'm going to apply pressure to that dog. At that point, I'm usually using an e-collar. And if they want to go whatever other direction they want to go, they can only go so far before they get stopped. And then the only way pressure turns off is when they go to that object. And so I try to
Yeah.
do that stuff with a line on the dog first so that when I
Like
take
a
the line,
long line.
yeah.
Okay.
And so like when I take the line off the dog,
Flexi leads are
they've
dope for
already
this.
decided. Flexi lead's fine too,
They're
but
dope
like
for this.
but like yeah, but so the idea is that I have already worked through the idea that you are going to try to explore other options because now you already know your advantage in that situation is to go grab that object as quickly as you can, and I prevented you from being able to do anything else.
Do you guys do
So
a,
this is
a
where I
walk? Do
bring
y'all do a
in-
walking fetch prior to pile?
I don't
don't,
do
no.
walking fetch.
Okay.
I do a little bit of just groundwork on a long line, and then I'll usually just do a pile and I back away from it.
So when
I
you do
don't-
your piles, though, are you just placing the pile and having the dog pick the pile?
what I don't understand.
You're
the
just
question.
putting bumpers out, and there's no prey item involved. It's just
drop
dead
bumpers,
prey. Yeah.
and then I always mark the pile. So I guess there is
Okay,
prey because
there's
I'm
one
throwing
prey.
one bumper there.
Okay.
But eventually, I want to get to the point where it's kind of arbitrary. But for me, I want to be able to be 100 yards away,
Yeah.
and have the dog not have
Yeah.
anything thrown for them, and I can just push
For
them
sure.
to
So
the
I
piles
start
where
with
I want to end.
I'll start with more prey
Yeah,
on the front side, right?
yeah.
To help incentivize that, so I can really isolate those pressures down,
Yeah.
and then I'll just fade that out as we go, right?
Like some of the stuff you were saying with like the no-goes and some of those other things, like those are problems I experienced when I was using only pressure. And so I just feel like the way that you choose to train, it's not that I think anyone is right or wrong. It's just knowing where the the cost is, because everything has a cost.
100%. And like, so I'll be honest. Like, I got through walk and fetch. I got to the pile with Ripple, um, without no goes, without popping, and I still, uh, I was unhappy with what I perceived as the level of discipline. Like, I felt like I was essentially eliciting a prey response with pressure. And did not have the force to the pile that I was hoping to achieve. And so I couldn't, I'd have to go back and like find out exactly why I felt like that. But I felt like
Do you have it on
I
video?
got ignition.
Do you have it on video?
It'd be tough. I've got little clips of video that would.
I'd just like to see it for
yeah.
my own.
But I could get him at my side, and I go bing, zip, and he'd zip out there, like come back, like and it just at the end of the day, I went back and I could get to walking fast. I mean, like it was beautiful in the fact that very clear signals.
Yeah.
But I just elevated the level of pressure, went back to continuous pressure and abbreviated back down. Like that's something that I think is very important.
Yes.
And in that process, and and just made it a more disciplinary behavior.
But I think that part that you just said is that would still be part of my process. Is
Sure.
I'm gonna make it spicy enough that I see the behavioral change in the dog that lets me know this isn't just a cue for the behavior.
Yes.
This is something I want
and
to
and
go
that's
away.
and that's more than likely my lack of understanding of the unforced force fetch.
I think that's a lot of people that do it and advertise it
Yeah.
is also their misunderstanding.
Yeah, like
But where do you insert that? Do you insert it on the table, or do you wait till you get to the ground?
I like to do it on the table, and you were talking about like holding the collar and with the ear pinch. So I talked about this somewhere. A guy in our NAVDA chapter, the former training director, he would call it kicking splinters. And so that's where I'm typically using an e-collar and then a flat collar that I have a
yeah, I do
leash
the same
on.
thing. Back
And
pressure.
I'm pushing you
Yeah.
with the e-collar, and you need to dig in and fight
Yeah.
through the back pressure to get there. And that's when I'm using a high enough
I
level that I
actually-
know it's uncomfortable.
I use an eye bolt as a bit of a kind of a pulley for
Yeah.
back pressure, and so like I'll
Oh, I like
release you
that.
this way back to that. That's a Rex car deal.
I like
Yeah.
that.
So Randall,
E-collar. I'll just beat you to it.
Yep.
Like, yeah, I like an e-collar. I like to be impersonal when I'm doing force fetch. Like this, I personally don't like to make it about me. Like I don't like injecting myself in there. I don't like adding the physical cue that the dog sees me applying the pressure. Like the way I do things, I don't like it.
Oh, the other thing I'll say, just because of your response there, is every single thing that I do, I'm going to have multiple ways that I apply pressure. I'll have some form of negative reinforcement. I usually have one that's analog and one that's digital. And then I'm also usually going to mark and punish behavior also. So like your failure to give me a prompt response to something, I have a punishment marker, and then there will be a punishment event for those things. And I think that is another thing that, like, people talk a lot about trial prep and dogs getting smart to tools and things. My whole thing is it doesn't matter what you're wearing or what came off. I have a way, if I need to come for that ass, like
Yeah.
I have a way to do that.
That comes for me later, right?
Yeah.
Like that comes later.
yeah.
I mean, you can ask him if I say "fooey," like Creek looks
Game
at me
over.
like, "Holy, I'm about to die."
Yeah.
You
Right,
know,
right.
like that.
And-
The
and
negative
this-
markers. That's probably we're getting a little off subject, but like teaching that to people and showing that they can have that stem control without having tools is huge.
That's my first lesson with most pet dog people.
Yeah,
'Cause if
you
I
can tell your dog no.
if I can fix
Yeah.
the one thing
Yeah.
that bothers them the most, then I can usually get them to buy in to do the 6 or 8 weeks of other stuff.
Yeah. You say
But
no.
I would,
no doesn't mean stop what you're doing. No means prepare to feel pain.
Yeah,
Or
right.
drive into target behavior, depending on how you
Sure.
prep it, right?
Yeah.
So, like, I will preface this though, like, for my personal dogs, I prep force fetch heavily with tug. Like, I do a lot of abbreviated bite work stuff with them. Like, they're getting back tied. We're putting back pressure on them. We're teaching them to regrip. We're doing all this kind of thing. Like, your out's already clean. Like, those things are already there. The dog already wants to do them in drive. Like, I've already got that. And I really think that lays a foundation that when I go to force fetch and now I go through unforced force fetch through the NEPA post system, like now I just have that clean cue of, hey, turn that game on, and you will see me go through that, and then I'll go back to doing it with a tug. So we'll get through it, pressure on, the whole thing, but then the game starts, and that reward event after, I think, is huge. I think that pays dividends.
So we could stay on this one forever because it's force fetch, and I can see Grayson's wheels turning. But
I'm sure
Chris
I'm
Armanini already
stopping,
beat it
like,
to
I gotta-
death.
right. So let's move on. We only have one tool to train with for the rest of your dog training career or life. What is it and why? Randall, start with you since you went last on the last one.
One tool?
Just one tool, one training tool.
Like I have to pick between an e-collar and a launcher?
E-collar, launcher, check cord, take your pick.
Oh, we're adding leashes in here. It's really any tool.
Slip lead,
Mm,
prong collar.
Assuming you have a leash.
Yeah.
okay, so I got a leash. I have a leash.
I mean, a prong collar is useless if you don't have a leash, so I guess that's implied.
So I do get a leash.
Yeah, same thing if you got like a pinch collar for
Oh, perfect. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. That's, I mean, probably for me and just like how I do things, probably an e-collar, right? Like you can use that for a lot of different things. So that's probably what I'm going with. If you made me pick just one, I don't know. I don't see how to
Nate?
expand on that one, but
I spent a long time training dogs with just a long line, a leash, and a chain collar. So
you already get a
I'm
leash,
good.
so you might as well
Right.
take something
But
else.
that's what I'm saying. I like honestly, if I could have a slip lead, but it was 20 feet long,
Oh, I
I'd
got
be
one.
good with just that.
Yeah, I got one for you.
Yeah, I think yeah, it's hard. I think it's tough because I think the versatility of an e-collar is extremely valuable, um, but I would say, choke chain probably.
I
That sucks because
respect
I don't
that
even. I like.
response. I respect that
I prefer
response.
a prong collar for most applications, but I
that.
can get it. I can.
I agree.
I can.
Yes.
I can get it done with a choke
I
chain.
can hear it now. Nay, phooey, whap.
Well, the physical force is important to have.
Yeah.
Like,
I agree.
No. All right, good stuff. Staying on the subject of tools, you mentioned Randall that you're going with e-collar. We've talked about e-collar in a number of different ways already on this episode alone. How would you guys say, and this is really the only like soapbox political question that I have, but like when it comes to a topic such as e-collars, and we see e-collars getting banned in other countries, you see it coming up on the dockets in certain states. How is it like how important is it for the average dog owner in our space to recognize the value of an e-collar to the point to where even if they don't use it, they need to be able to like have an actual intelligent conversation about it because we are facing the inevitable outlawing of the e-collars at some point. It's gonna happen here in the U.S. Like,
if it,
I
if
mean,
it
Michael
had,
Ellis already covered it. Michael Ellis has been covering this for a while now, and the best thing that I've heard him say about it is, you know, we were all fighting about it amongst the dog community of force free versus balance versus compulsion people, and he says, hey, you know, like that's not what this is about. Like it's about who does this tool, who does it help, right? And he laid out two options. You know, you've got this 70-year-old lady with a dog she can't really handle. But if you approach someone who knows what they're doing with this tool and can get a handle on your dog and can teach you how to use this tool, and now you can live comfortably, even if you have to manage some things, this tool can do that and not necessarily have to be, you know, the hand of God every time you push the button, right? But what did that do? It either A, saved that dog's life, or kept that old lady from getting hurt, right? Getting yanked down the street, biting a kid, whatever. And the safety factor that provides when you have a trained professional teach you how to use that tool properly. And there's a whole community out there that wants to bastardize it, and they have an agenda for that. But that's another subject.
it's a great tool. I mean, but at the end of the day, part of me would be really interested to see what it would be like if we all went back to not having them, not having access to them. But I think, and I've said it a lot of times. I mean, the thing that makes the e-collar so wonderful is like it's impersonal, it's precise, it's subtle, It's all of those things as long as you're willing to allow them to be those things, or it's less subtle, but it's effective, and this is politically incorrect, but my buddy has a saying, and I like it. Is if the Indians had had it, they'd have used it. It's a good piece of gear. And it's like all technology. We can hate the fact that we live in modernity, but we all benefit from it. So
Um, so I think for me, I do think that people should feel obligated to understand the tools that they use. One of the good things about the country that we live in is people have freedoms to do things that other people in other countries don't really have. But I think that the other side of that is the responsibility piece. And it's when people are behaving irresponsibly with those things, that's when someone has a leg to stand on and really has a sound argument against those tools. And so for me, I think that it's really important that people know what they're doing and become educated on those things. And I would rather that that's a thing that we sort of police our own rather than it's some legislation that kind of comes down.
But comparatively to the other aversive tools that we have at our disposal, choke chains, slip leashes, things like that,
Yeah.
you're not going to kill a dog with an e-collar.
You're not.
You can kill a dog with a choke chain or slip lead, even though they appear to be more safe or whatever. You can't kill a dog with an e-collar outside of some cardiac issue.
you can take it
right?
off and beat them to death with it.
Like the old Tritronics that you had to put the fuses in. Maybe that one.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I think my statement is more about all of those things. And I think like especially when we're looking at this space, uh hunters are a pretty big and pretty powerful lobby when they stand up for things that they care about. Um, and then I also think we see that a lot of the negative attention that we bring upon ourselves is our own fault, right? Like most people, when you ask them about all the stuff that we do, they're indifferent or generally supportive, even if they have no interest in it. And when that stops is when people do dumb shit. And then that's when there's a problem. So I think that I still stand by what I said. It's not specific to e-collars. It's just there's the rights and responsibilities thing. And so I don't ever want to lose the right to use whatever tool I want on my dog, but I think that it's the personal responsibility of people to kind of just have that standard for themselves that they're going to actually know what they're doing with the tools that they use. I won't go so far as other people will to say like you should have a driver's license for it, right? Like you need to
Yeah.
get trained before you use it. But I would not really respect a person that wouldn't have that inside themselves to be like I'm going to want to put this stuff on my dog and I'm not going to figure out how to use it before I do it.
I think,
Yeah, we see that a lot.
unfortunately, this bleeds into a political conversation, and I just think, it's real. I agree 100%. Like anybody listening to this podcast is likely gonna understand the gravity of what Nate said about rights come with responsibilities. But that said, I think it's also really important to understand that people are going to abuse things,
Yeah.
and people are not going to be responsible, and you have to decide. I can't.
If you're
believe
going to
I'm
hold
gonna-
everyone accountable for something some like one person
well,
did.
not just one. Even if the majority is idiots,
Yeah.
it doesn't. There's no liberty if we give up these rights
Right.
because others act irresponsibly.
Yeah.
Like and so I'm not saying we should, it's very and the most important thing any of us can do is be responsible and understand that it's our job to be vigilant about our own responsibilities, and to hold as many people accountable as possible individually, and so that we're not governed out of the right to have these things.
Yes.
And we need to be very careful with that.
Would y'all agree with my assessment that it's almost inevitable that a ban will come down? It may not be tomorrow.
I don't
it may
agree.
not be
I don't
I don't
agree
think
with it,
so.
and I am an optimist.
Yeah.
But I would say this, like it would be a huge, terrible omen for what is to follow if e-collars are banned in this
I
country.
would, I
A lot of
would,
dogs
I,
would
I
die.
would have agreed with you until we had the events we've had since like 2020, where you just, it seems like people just are begging to be ruled by someone else.
My thing too is like, think of all the dogs that are going to die from the fallout of not having e-collars.
Sure.
Yes.
Right. People can't.
It's going to change dog
yeah,
ownership for
yeah.
sure.
I mean, there are people getting by managing their dogs with an e-collar. They can at least live life safely. And then you take that tool away from them, they're not going to go learn keeler. Like they're not
Yeah.
going to learn how to do
Or
this
they're not
stuff.
physically capable.
Or capable, right? And those dogs are going to get euthanized.
Oh, I can't. Half the reason I can't. Well,
Yeah,
it's
my
not half
left
the reason,
shoulder.
but
Yeah.
I can't do a lot of that work anymore because I have like a non-functional hip. So
Oh, for me, it's my left shoulder from
Yeah.
spicy
the
mountain walls dragging me around.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, like I said, the beauty of the e-collars, the precision, and the subtlety, and the lack of required physical force. And like it takes it's an equalizer. And at the lack of coming off as chauvinist, um, so often I get the guy with his hunting dog that's so into it, it's going to be a companion gun dog, and now only on turnover day does the rest of the family show up. And now it's like, and it's imperative to them that everybody in the family be able to handle the dog when only the dad's shown any interest.
Yeah.
And now, we're going to walk down the road. And
Yeah.
so here's your prong collar because there's a level of self correction that comes with it. And here's your e collar and here's your setting because you can push this button and there's a quote unquote reflexive response, right? If I've done my job correctly. Now, of course, that has to be maintained, but it's a tool like no other
And
in
that's
regard.
ultimately why I wanted to ask, because I think it is imperative that we cover this in an honest way, in an informative way, but we talk about this openly and honestly, because I don't share your optimism.
Sure.
You and I've spoken about this to where I can be hopeful, but ultimately I'm kind of pessimistic about it, especially if Colorado, it's up on the docket for public voting right now in different lights. Once it passes one state, that precedent is set, and then it just spreads and spreads and spreads. And then you're looking at it down the barrel of the UK and Australia, to where it just showed up. And it's just like, I hope I'm wrong. I hope it doesn't happen, but
you got to stop looking at things like you look at rough grouse in Tennessee.
Which just sucks. I mean, it's there's a lot of things that and I mean, we have responsibilities as human beings and as free human beings to do the right thing, and if we need Big Brother to tell us what we can and can't do and what's right and what's wrong, then we're no longer a free society, and that sucks.
I mean,
Yes.
that one rings home for me. I mean, you guys know my background. Like, I didn't go over there and do all that stuff for someone to tell me how to live my life.
right.
If we can be responsible citizens, or
Yep.
you should have liberty.
All right. Next one. How much should we care about the dog's history and quote unquote sob story when developing our training plans?
I don't think that that sort of information is really often useful in addressing the problems that came from it, even if it's true. So the first thing is, coming from a background where you work with a lot of rescue dogs, most of the time the information that you got from whoever you received your dog from is not, it's not something anyone observed. It's something they suppose based on how the dog acts. And I would say most of the time, the dogs that people say were like abused, for instance, were probably neglected, but not abused, right? They're under socialized. That is probably really what more of the issue is. Or they just have, they're nervy. It's a genetic thing, right? And so I think most of the time that's the case. Now, I know dogs, I've trained dogs that were found in a meth house with a wire hanger wrapped around their mouth and duct tape and and stuff. I mean, they have the scar from it, and so you see stuff like that, and those things happen. But like everybody's pit bull is a bait dog, and it's like they wouldn't be alive, they wouldn't be here, right? It's just not true. And then I think the other thing too is when we're training, we are looking at achieving a goal now, and so that's forward thinking and it's in the moment. I don't think that the dogs really, I mean, they have a history of experiences that they don't forget. But if you're not putting them in situations that are similar to what they experienced before, assuming that stuff is true, I just don't think that it's really relevant at all.
Well, it doesn't change the way they learn.
How
Like,
many-
they still learn through pairing
How
training.
many
Like,
dogs do you guys get that have separation anxiety?
oh my god!
according
And that's
to
a, like a
that?
that's a 100% owner created problem.
Of course.
And
Like,
an overused term.
yeah.
Like
it's-
there's not a lot.
and how
true
quickly is it
anxiety.
resolved?
Oh man, as soon as they hand me the leash,
Yeah.
It's like,
right? It's done.
It's like, oh, that's over. No,
I
no.
find that mostly in my pet clients. Like I don't find that in my bird dog clients.
I get a
but-
few because of the companion.
We
guys.
posted we got a doodle at the house right now, right? You take him to go get groomed. He needs 3 people to hold him so you can cut his nails.
You
The
cut-
first time we do it, it's just me, right?
Yeah.
So like just all of that
Hey,
stuff.
just don't look at me like that. I'm going to cut your nails.
Right.
Oh,
the only
okay.
the only two things I ever ask for is like, do they have a bite history or are they a flight risk? Those are the only two things I really want to know. But don't.
Rarely do they know if they're a flight risk.
Yeah, like I don't.
The
I got him
story-
from a shelter. He was that's every dog that I've ever gotten that was from a shelter was abused, and I just don't think that's reality.
The stories are for the people. And the question I always ask when I hear that is, well, if you're so, charitable and so giving and so caring, like, why didn't you pick your spouse the same way you picked your dog? Like,
Yeah.
why didn't you pick the bum
Yeah.
off the street that's a fucking drunk and, like, rehab that motherfucker?
That's
like,
a better one because I always ask like, why didn't you take all the dogs from the shelter then? If they're
That's a
that's
beautiful.
That's better than mine.
Oh, you have to beat that, but it was awesome, man.
You adopted a dog. Let's go adopt a homeless guy.
All right. I think this is going to be the last one. I got a whole list of things, but we'll have to save them for
I'm
later.
having a lot of fun with this, though.
It is
We'll
fun.
keep going.
This is interesting.
Man, there's a lot of good ones. Let's do this one. Generally speaking, overall, bigger picture, what's more important, nature or nurture?
You asked that with a straight face. Nature, 100%.
Randall's thinking.
Yeah, I'm just gonna take me a second. Go ahead, let Nate answer.
I 100% agree with Grayson. I think what's interesting is being involved in breeding and training. The breeder in me and the trainer in me have very different goals. I feel most accomplished as a trainer when I shine shit, and as a breeder, the whole point of you existing is to produce a dog that basically doesn't need training.
Doesn't need polished.
Right.
Yeah, Yeah, I mean, it's hard. It's hard to nurture something that's not.
Not there.
Yeah,
Nurture-
it's way easier when you got good stuff to work with.
I think there's so many examples, and it's so much easier to talk in terms of humans. But just like, how many dudes did you know at Ranger Bat that came from crap, and
Yeah, I mean,
and made and made good,
yeah.
and like
Yep.
by all accounts, or how many,
Trust me,
there's
man.
just
We
some-
had Chicago gang members, KC gang members, people growing up in meth labs, and they turned out to be fantastic rangers. But yeah, they just had it in them. I think is where you were getting at, right? Like they
It's just-
innately had something in them that made them a better product.
Well, and
person.
I mean, and some people would call that a form of escapism or whatever, but I think, like, like, you- we're all dealt a certain deck we got to play, and we got to play it. And dogs are the same way, and we can shine crap, like you can. And that's like you said. I mean, my entire business model, my market, are not people that are going to put a VC on their dog. They're people that have the dog they have, and they would love to take it to the preserve or wild bird hunting and be able to do something with it.
Yep.
And it's my job to help them get there. And so
Yep.
nurture is absolutely important. But, you know, we got to work with what we got to work with.
The best way I heard somebody kind of explain this, in my opinion, it was Canine Paradigm, I think, kind of talked about this, and I think it was Glenn uh, who said it. He kind of talked about like your genetics or your nature. If you think about the dog as being like a stone like monolith, right? It's like that's what you have as a starting point, and then as you're training, you're sculpting that into what you eventually want it to be. You can't add more stone back, right? So like whatever you have to start with is what you have. And so if you wanted to make this big, huge, really impressive thing, you can't do that unless you start with a big, huge, impressive block of
Yeah, it's better to have
granite.
marble or granite than
Yeah.
like sandstone.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And the constitution of the particular thing. Yeah, that's true too.
I
Yeah,
will
for
say
sure.
it's a great show, but I can't ever keep their voices separate. They're just one host in my brain.
The two Australians,
Yeah,
one
that's
host.
crikey mate. Like it's just one
Crikey,
person
mate.
in my
Yeah.
brain.
Oh, I hope
Nerd.
they'll never listen to that.
So, I mean, how big of a concern I'm hearing it at least more around whether it's other podcasts or social media, the whole as training as this kind of modern training outlook and principles. s- Some people are saying that some training is overshadowing genetics now and things are getting hidden. And so if we say that nature is more important than nurture, then wouldn't that alleviate that concern?
The point of training is to fill in gaps. I think, right? Like you don't, if something's already great, then leave it. The only thing you're not going to improve it, so you don't touch it. And then, the whole point to me for that is like with pet dogs, when I run group classes and you have mixed company there, you have different people with different dogs, different backgrounds. I don't want anybody that's watching that class to be able to tell which dog bit people and which one didn't. And like that's kind of the whole point of the training is if you get to the desired end goal, then
Totally hunting
I
dogs.
mean, and
Yeah.
especially like depending, it's somewhat tougher for certain clients than others. But I would say, to me, this is why I like field trials better than hunt test. Like because you know, for genetic selection, um, because objective standards, there are great trainers that can pass objective standards with dogs, and I think that will sort itself out through competition in a way that can't be sorted out through testing.
I don't like the subjectivity of it.
I understand.
So
that.
like when I talk to people that do IGP, and it's like the judge just gets 40 points because he's like, I don't like your dog's face when they were healing.
But at the same time, IGP is a test. It's it's an objective standard. When I say field
It
trialing,
used to be.
well, in theory, but that could be said for NAVDA or even AKC hunt tests. Like,
Yeah.
but when you have to select a winner, and I think over a general trend, because I think yes, one day you could run under one judge, and that judge likes this specific thing, and this other judge likes this thing, but the general trend is you should have an experienced dog man that is going to select the dog that met a standard, a basic requirement, and at the end of that, amongst other dogs that met a standard,
Yeah.
and at the end of the day, they picked one winner. And if that dog can replicate that amongst several different judges over the course of its life, I would prefer to breed to that dog than the dog that went and passed a test over and over and over again and got ribbons.
Yeah. The overwhelming majority of our disagreements, Grayson, I feel it come down to you spend the significant majority of your time as a dog trainer, and I spend the significant majority of my time with dogs as an instructor of people training their dogs.
Yeah.
And so, like, the objective standard thing for me and like the standardized test for me is that's a quality control thing. It's a consumer protection thing, right? Like if you're gonna pick a dog trainer, you pick the guy down the street or you pick me, I'm gonna tell you up front exactly what you're gonna get at the end of this program. And I think that that is a valuable thing for a client to have. And then the other piece for me is I want to see, uh, because so much of the work that we do is I'm trying to polish a turd a bit sometimes, is like I want to be able to say, can I get 80 to 90% of the dogs that come here to be able to meet this standard? Because I think that that's proof of the repeatability of my training. When I see folks doing field trials, you have to be a very gifted trainer, very talented trainer. You also have to have the right dog. And so it's a combination of a lot of stuff that I think is just not, it's not what my actual practical everyday focus is. And I think that's why I lean to like the standardized stuff more. So like the German dogs that we have,
Yeah.
the standard makes sure that every single person that buys one of those dogs has a good hunting
Well,
dog.
that said, I'm sorry.
No, I
Please
mean
go.
those people are the field trialers are very specialized in what they're doing, whereas the hunt tests seem to be more broad in scope. Right, you're doing more things, asking more of dogs to change gears and
They
do
are
different
also getting
things.
repeatedly watered down too, so it makes them less meaningful.
It's funny. That was another question that I had on the docket.
Well, let's
we
do
didn't
one more
get
then.
Well,
to.
yeah, to address that, I think from a German testing system, in my opinion, the strength of consistency, if we really talk German dogs, is the the policing of the system and the breed wardens.
And I think you get a little bit of that like old world flavor because of how young those dogs have to do
Yes.
their tests. So you see dogs that can handle pressure, both like environmental and circumstantial, as well as like the pressure you would get in training, and that they have to have the ability to do that, and that they develop at a reasonably young age, at least the some of the elements of prey drive
But it's
and
just, I mean,
things like
it's
that.
like that over there, and I think the people that take it very seriously here that are willing to submit to those systems in this country, like for real, because I think America is a terrible place for German systems to come, because I think Americans don't like to be told what to do,
Yeah.
and that system is completely reliant on doing what you're told.
Yeah, but you participate in it voluntarily.
Of course, but over there,
Yeah.
you not so much.
Yes, correct.
And so, but in field trials, it's you take all that crap out of the equation, and it's just a replicable best dog of the day over and over again. Makes enough of a name to be considered a stud.
So how do you feel about like drops and pointing labs?
I think pointing labs would be like uh, a sister that you want to kiss. Like, I think it's fine if what you want to do is set up on the pen race pheasant.
You gotta clip that for like Instagram, man.
Like, I just drops I got no problem with whatsoever, as long as they are the best dog on the field.
Yeah.
Like, because you could have a drop. I mean, like, I had a dog out of God, what was that dog's name? There was I want to say it was like Black Rock Ice, something like that. It was a tricolored pointer that was the shooting dog jam of, it was like the flavor of the week for a little while about 12 years ago. And just so you know, like, a tricolored pointer is not a common thing. And so the odds are there was a setter somewhere in the woodpile up close. But that dog was awesome, like, and it was a great dog, and it won a lot, and it got bred to a lot. And so there are obviously, so when you say drop to me, I'm thinking setter and pointer, and to me, essentially,
That's the dog you want.
well, it's
That's what you described
it's essentially
earlier.
the same. It's essentially the same breed. One's got hair on it, and the other one doesn't.
Sure.
And then but I also have like
But like there's a guy out there now breeding like Labrador GSB crosses.
one of the
and
best
things like
dogs that I have
I heard that's getting popular.
like
actually.
around my kennel
Yeah.
right now is like a buddy of mine that's a USDA trapper. He's a killer outdoorsman, and he just has kind of got this romantic thing about not having. He wants to take that kind of mongrel thing and do well with it, and he
Yeah.
ended up with a Griff Lab cross that was an oops litter from somebody. Perfect compromise of a dog.
Yeah.
Like actually, literally, it picked up. Like it has enough point to do the pointing work. You could absolutely make a master hunter out of that dog. Like it's a great dog. I have a Muncie Brittany cross. There was another oops litter that has as a client that brings her dog out. She's a night. She's not the, she's got some sensitivities and some softness, but we took her woodcock
That's
hunting
got to
last.
come from the breed.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. Took her woodcock hunting last year, and she pointed like 8 birds in a day, and
Nice.
we shot a bunch of birds for her. And she's a
Yeah.
nice dog for that lady. Like I just think a good dog's a good dog as far as that stuff's concerned. I think if I lived in Germany, I would do the German stuff. But I live in America. I like field trialing.
I definitely want to preserve everything that you said. I do like the I like the rigidity of the system. I just do.
I like,
don't-
and that's the thing is like I wish I could be more like that, and I'm lucky.
We talked about this before.
Yeah.
Like I hated English and I loved math,
Yeah.
and you were like,
I loved English.
math
and
can
stuff.
suck it, and I was great at history and English.
Yeah, that's who we are.
All right, guys. I think this has gone on long enough. So unless somebody has anything left to add, I thought this was a lot of fun and got a couple fights. It wasn't a complete love fest by any means, but I hope you guys had fun. I enjoyed it.
It's great.
That was a good conversation.
Yeah. Anything left to add? Anybody?
I just feel like you had so many more questions on that.
Oh, I
list.
did. We could do a complete different one.
Yeah, we could do this for 72 hours. straight.
We would not get up and go hunting in the park.
We'll dump the memory cards and then start all over and be up till 5 a.m. doing this. But guys, I appreciate you not only entertaining me on this podcast and the one before, but sharing camp. It was a pleasure. Sharing the woods, chasing birds, chasing dogs, all the fun stuff, the stuff we live for. I'm glad we finally made this happen. We've been talking about it for a while and enjoyed it, and I look forward to the next time.
Thanks, buddy.